Hello and welcome to God Tier Fanfiction. Today I'm gonna continue the series What If Naruto Came Back from Darkness and Guided Konoha Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Root's finest product was thought to be Fu Yamanaka. He had an impeccable mission record, never failing to complete a duty and obeying even the most challenging commands with absolute commitment. He was regarded as Danzu's most potent weapon. The very tool of his will, more adept than his colleague Aburame, who wields insects. He was more skilled than any shinobi in Root. Danzo had even publicly told him that, should he pass away, he would take over as the Foundation's sole legitimate successor. And Danzo made a sensible decision. Fu was a born leader. His right-hand guy, who was tasked with ensuring his personal safety. Fu is practically the ideal son he would never have. Fu received all of this with humble regard, and his only reaction was to serve his master even more assiduously. Because of this, he felt comfortable taking on the perilous assignment of tracking down Namikaze Naruto, the Yellow Fang of Konoha. Every bingo book on the continent lists it as an S-class. Iwagakure had warned him to avoid at all cost, due to his extremely hazardous skills. Iwa was terrified of only one other shinobi, as they say, like father, like son. Fu disregarded all of that, preferring to categorize Naruto as merely another mission. His life was his mission, he was always successful. Because of this, he preferred to follow him during the day when no one would be expecting him. The man tended to let his guard down whenever he was in the village, according to what his sister had told him. Like a mouse oblivious to the hawk circling overhead, he would be easy prey. However, his sister had made a serious error of judgment. One didn't get to Naruto's level after years of service and experience by unwinding once they arrived at a village's safety. Those who have attained the status of S-class would refer to it as instinct, while many would label it paranoia. Always be on the lookout. Fu never would have imagined that he would be reduced to nothing and treated like a toy. After playing with him to test how valuable he was, the man gave him a strong smack that made his spine tremble. He had never felt so inferior in his life. He tried to end it all by plunging into that endless emptiness since he knew he was losing, but even then, the man was simply too quick. He was done. Simple and uncomplicated. As his mind was torn apart and his ideas examined like a scientific experiment, he knew his fate was set in stone. His body worked non-stop until it was numb to pain. His mind was so fiercely guarded that not even his consciousness had a voice, and his abilities, which he had spent years honing, were all useless. Completely and abhorrently worthless. As Naruto proceeded with his mental dissection, mercilessly slicing through his head like a knife, Fu had already lost his ability to speak by the second day and his fine motor skills were virtually deteriorated, leaving him with nothing to do but groan. His body began to go numb, a sign that he would soon lose all sensation. Fu's head fell lifelessly to the side as Naruto blinked, ending the mental torment. His bloodshot eyes were wide open, and a river of drool was continuously flowing out of his lips. Since he began his genjutsu, they had not blinked. 72 hours have passed since then. Naruto felt the last of his reserves drain, and he almost passed out. His eye was jerking violently, and he was breathing heavily. He really wasn't good at genjutsu. His body was exhausted, but his mind was working non-stop. He simply killed the mentally terrified man where he stood because of an intense, unadulterated rage. However, he gave in. He would put his thoughts back together and have the man watch while that whore met the same end. He was the only one who would be patient with her. Wasn't she rude? He wanted to find out if she could withstand pain better than her sibling. He let out a long breath and attempted to slow his pounding heart. He was pushing himself to try not to dispel, and his limbs felt like they weighed a ton. In the real world, what had seemed like 3 days in this room was actually just a moment. Although it had been difficult for him, it was ultimately worthwhile. He had gained all the knowledge he needed. Yes, he was fully aware of Danzu's plans and how Riha was the key, or perhaps more accurately, the surrogate he needed to obtain his genes. Danzu's, best of the best, Fu, was his right hand. He got access to some of the man's deepest secrets because of his position. All of the secrets were displayed to him like a movie theater's projector. His body had initially gone numb from the breathtaking awareness of it all. He was devastated, perplexed, hurt, deceived. Above all, though, he felt foolish. Of all people, he was foolish enough to let anything like this happen to him. He had to give the man credit for employing a lady, a seductress, to persuade him to let down the guarded barricades he had put up for years and play him like a violin while cutting the strings very slowly. From the beginning, She had been taking advantage of him by tying him to a leash and walking him like a dog. Her brother informed Danzo of all he had told her. Everything, including their private moments, his way of life, his jutsu, his friends, his genin, his deceased family, and even his discussions. All of this was reported. The seals attached to their tongues, one of which was meticulously concealed on her so that not even his Sharingan could detect it, would allow Fu and Riha to speak telepathically. After removing her initial seal, which Fu remembered as being excruciating enough, the guy painfully extended her tongue to its abnormal full length and placed another seal on her where you would never see it. It had simply demonstrated to him the extreme measures Danzo went to ensure that his particular whore was securely fastened. Since he wasn't the first of her numerous targets, he concluded that her new title fit her well. She had been everywhere, as Fu's thinking had revealed. She enslaved Kumo, Kiri, Suna, and even Iwa. He felt empty inside at the prospect of it all. Then he was burned, like a flickering flame that gradually intensifies. The back of his skull was the source of the scorching feeling. More precisely, he had a burning sensation in the left side of his brain. The marginal drain that he normally didn't even notice, even when he was tired, started to drain at an alarming rate, causing his Sharingan to burn to the point of discomfort and forcing him to cover it. He looked on in stony stillness, lowering his trembling arm from his headband. He was going to scatter, however, he desired the presence of the original. Although his space-time ninjutsu skills were currently lacking, he had been studying whenever he had free time, and his efforts had paid off as he was able to acquire the Thunder God Jutsu, which was just slightly below the level of its original inventor. It was impossible for him to use it like his father. He focused his chakra on the Thunder God marker on his back, the same one his father had put on him when he was a youngster, while holding up the ram symbol. He then poured the last of his chakra through it, sending a signal over time and space to reach his original. Naruto is incredibly proud of Team 7. Since their first day together in that classroom, each of them had advanced significantly. Despite their attempt to murder him during another training session, he secretly grinned as he parried Konohamaru's attacks, avoided Sakura's deadly blows, and deflected Sasuke's fire with some wind. He had believed that the SD exam would corrupt their impressionable brains and cause them to reject the actual brutality of shinobi existence. He never would have thought they would recover so swiftly, accepting the truth of the situation like real soldiers. It was comforting. Their young minds merely needed a night's sleep, but even seasoned Chunin needed weeks to heal. Perhaps he had misjudged their intelligence, but he would never again assume they were incapable of handling anything. Mostly. Kick his ass guys. He blocked off their ferocious taijutsu combination, ignoring Riha's yell of encouragement. They were improving. He could no longer just walk over them as he once could. He now had to exert some effort to render them unconscious. Just a little, though. With his Sharingan blazing, Sasuke attempted to dismember him by palming two kunai. His motions had become more fluid and his strikes more accurate since finishing his dojutsu. Naruto was unable to dance around him like he used to since his eyes could anticipate his moves. That was not the case with Konohamaru. The boy had a violent temper. This small monkey was attempting to smash his face in, even though he was aware of the Sarutobi talent. Sakura as well. As she kept up with both lads and attempted to land a glowing fist on his form, his precious, innocent little Pinky-chan, who used to detest even sweat on her form, had the most nasty scowl he had ever seen on the girl. He took care to stay out of her reach. Out of the whole crew, he would say she had made the most progress. She was no longer her two comrades' weak point. Now standing side by side, she was a proud kunoichi who had earned her status as a soldier. Since their discussion during the bell test, she had long since stopped taking her shinobi life seriously. She had approached him directly for one-on-one training following one of their previous sessions in an attempt to raise her level to that of her teammates. He was first apprehensive since he knew that she would need to do a lot of personal training in order to stay up with her two teammates. However, she showed him that she was prepared for anything he hurled at her with an expression of resolve and will that the boys had mockingly called inner Sakura. Was he ever going to be taken by surprise? He would brutally knock her around until she blacked out or his knuckles ached from hitting her forehead during what Sakura would refer to as torture. She would simply get back up as many times as he knocked her down. The female really knew how to take a punch, he had to admit. She would occasionally become irritated that she could never even touch him because he would playfully avoid her. She would then grow enraged as that inner identity came to the surface. Extremely irate. She was so furious that she would charge him like a careless bull and let forth a howl of righteous female rage. He would undoubtedly chastise her for losing her cool and beat her to the ground for being so careless. A shinobi should never become agitated, However, she was able to deliver a glancing blow one day when the inner character erupted. He made fun of her for taking a shit the same color as her hair. Normally, he could have easily swatted away her blows, but he chose to give her a chance instead. He didn't anticipate being knocked down and sent flying. Her blow was painful. A lot. To make sure he wasn't experiencing hallucinations, he had to show off his Sharingan. Yes, a vicious right punch to the stomach from adorable tiny Pinky-chan had sent him flying. At first, Naruto couldn't believe it. Heck, he was certain that if he told the boys, they would either try to get him to check himself into the closest mental health facility or laugh at him for having a wonderful joke. However, he was able to see things that others were unable to see because of his Sharingan. She would instinctively build up and release her chakra with each blow she delivered as her fist struck his body. He had only witnessed this kind of chakra control in one other woman in his entire life. He was fleeing for his life while she attempted to strike him in the head with her valuable jewelry. He told her to punch a big boulder in the same manner that she had hit him, confirming his incredulity. Her blow had broken the boulder. The revelation of it all had nearly caused him to start hyperventilating, and he had almost killed the girl by crushing her with his hug. To boast, he had stopped training that day and taken her to Team Guy's training facility, where the Green Beast was giving his little clone a special session. He cherished that youngster as if he were a son. Sakura was perplexed. Naruto was giving her a hug one moment, and then he was conversing with a man wearing a green leotard who had the biggest eyebrows she had ever seen. The smaller clone of the man who had posed as Rock Lee and begged her to be his girlfriend added even more awkwardness to the situation. In an attempt to hear their sensei's whispered remarks, she had declined. The green-clad man's mouth fell open as she watched Naruto gesture to her by throwing his hands wide in the air and then slamming a fist into his open palm. Naruto nodded fervently, mimicking the boulder that she had broken apart with a shudder, and the man's thick eyebrows reached his hairline before he started shouting words about youth. He was standing in front of her and presenting himself before she could blink. Before Naruto obscured his view and mouthed the words, "She's mine," he had only managed to utter his name. "It wasn't fair," Guy-sensei said, breaking down in tears. She was completely perplexed by Naruto's responses, but he remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, Guy, but I will be the only one to light her flames of youth." What an odd day it had been. However, since Naruto had intensified her training in taijutsu, which became her strong suit, she never once regretted it. He had told her that she was unintentionally harnessing a certain Sanin's tremendous might in its early phases. He taught her a modified version of the rough fist style that emphasized important aspects of the technique while maintaining grace in order to complement her style. Naruto grinned as he remembered it all, glancing at Sakura as she tried to land one of her punches. "Gah. Just stay still, sensei. I promise I won't hurt you too bad." Naruto smiled as danced around her. "Ah, look boys, Pinky-chan is upset," he mocked. The boys didn't react to his words, only continuing their relentless assault, their scowls matching Sakura's as they had yet to even touch him. Goddamn him and his quickness. Beside Sakura, a red-eyed Konohamaru tried to surprise him with a sudden burst of speed, but he was always knocked back. Following their team meeting, he had started using the Kyuubi chakra around them. "Yo." Sasuke rolled his eyes as he leaned against the stump behind him. Despite his expression, he couldn't hide his grin. "You're both late." Beside him, Sakura hopped off the tree stump she was resting on, grinning at the sight of the duo. "Hello, Naruto-sensei, Konohamaru-kun." Her eyes lit shined at the sight of the female behind the pair, Riha-san. The woman gave the small girl a grin. "Hello, my dear." Sasuke blushed as blue eyes turned to face him. He nodded and raised a hand as a nonverbal welcome, saying, "Hi, Sasuke-kun." As Konohamaru ran up to the two, shook knuckles with Sasuke, and took an embrace from Sakura, Naruto grinned. Konohamaru gave the girl a sidelong glance before pointing to her hair. "You cut your hair?" It's true that the long hair that used to reach her back is now only mid-length and barely reaches her neck. She had pulled it into a ponytail to draw attention to it. Her clothing was even altered. She was still wearing her familiar pink dress, only no, it was shorter, resembling a skirt held together at the sides with some straps. Sakura nervously touched her hair. "It looks okay, right?" It was becoming too much of a problem and interfering with her training. Since Naruto's remarks during the exam, she had taken her shinobi life more seriously and felt it was time for some adjustments. And it was evident. She met the requirements for a suitable kunoichi in terms of strength, speed, and general quality. Konohamaru smiled. She gave him a charming smile before turning to face Sasuke. "Hell yeah, it looks really good." Sasuke growled as he sensed two sets of eyes on him, and then a tiny smile appeared on his face. It's nice. Konohamaru simply smiled foolishly, and Sasuke squinted. What? He insisted. Konohamaru teased. Nothing. It's just that Mr. Big Bad Uchiha has lost his touch. Sasuke's eyes become slits. You calling me soft? He said in a perilous whisper. Konohamaru's eyes closed as his smile grew so big, as a marshmallow. Konohamaru was speared to the ground by the Uchiha, who growled. Biting and scratching, the two lads started rolling across the training field while yelling insults. Sakura snarled at their shapes. Why do the both of you always have to act like idiots? Don't you see you're embarrassing Sensei? Before nodding, the two boys looked at Sakura, then at each other, and finally at each other. Sakura was tackled before she could respond, and the three of them started fighting. With a bitter sigh, Naruto looked up at the sky. As Sakura smashed both boys' heads together, Riha chuckled next to him. Oh my, what a rowdy bunch they are. Instead of responding, he just held out his hand and allowed a golden chain to emerge, saving the youngsters from their futile struggle. If he didn't step in, Sakura might truly harm the two. He approached them gradually to take a position in front of them when they were all restrained. He trailed off. Can we save the fighting for later? As Sakura pointed at the two boys and traced her thumb gently across her neck, causing both of them to shudder. Sakura. She lifted her scowl and gave him a charming grin. Naruto gave a headshake. Right, as I was saying, can you all save the fighting for later? I want to talk to everyone about the test. Although he was aware that everyone had likely spoken to the grief counselors in attendance, he still desired to speak with each individual. When he saw that they were nodding, he pulled back his chain and sat down in front of them, with Riha taking her time to sit next to him. His gaze shifted to Sasuke. How are you feeling? Sasuke shrugged and looked away. Naruto nodded, anticipating that kind of response. Okay, I guess. I didn't really get much sleep that night. Did you feel regretful? Or maybe sad that you had to take an innocent life? Sasuke looked him in the eye. Yeah, I couldn't fail. Failure would mean I'd never be able to see you guys again. I did what I had to do, right? Naruto stared at him before he nodded. Yeah, you did. He turned his eyes to Sakura, smiling inwardly when she didn't shy away from his gaze. What about you, Sakura? She fisted her hands into her dress. I couldn't really eat anything last night without trying not to puke. She licked her lips. I didn't get much sleep either. Not that it mattered anyway. It felt strange at first, but then after a while it settles. It's like my body and mind are used to it, she finished by whispering. After giving her a nod, Naruto moved to face Konohamaru. We already talked, Ko, but do you want to tell them what we discussed before we got here? The genin nodded slowly before he faced his two teammates. I have something to tell you guys. Seeing their curious gazes, he took a deep breath. It was either now or never. Yeah, I am the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Quiet. Naruto gazed at the two, observing their responses. Curiously, Sasuke simply appeared satisfied, grinning as though he already knew the secret. Sakura, meanwhile, furrowed her brow in perplexity before her eyes grew wide. Jerk. She said, giving Sasuke a hard blow to the head. That's what you meant when you said Jinchuriki. Konohamaru stared at Naruto, who arched a brow. Sasuke scratched his head and glared at Riha while she tried not to laugh. Sasuke attempted to deflect her hands, but she was able to pin him and put her fingers around his throat. It's not my fault you were an oblivious moron. For the so-called smartest kunoichi, you're pretty slow. I mean, come on, how obvious was it when it? Damn it, stop hitting me, Sakura. Ack. A throat clear stopped her attempt at strangulation. Konohamaru looked at the two of them stupidly and asked, So both of you already know? His voice betrayed his confusion. Sakura ignored Sasuke's probing gaze as she nodded. Well, I didn't know, but I guess Sasuke-kun already did. Remember the day of our test? He smiled. Well, right after you stormed off, Duckbutt here asked me if I knew you were a Jinchuriki. I kind of slowly figured it out after that. She smiled at Sweet Him before she frowned. Is that why you acted so arrogant? Were you in the academy to hide your status? Konohamaru slowly nodded. He trailed off, gesturing at Sasuke. Yeah, I was ordered to take up a fake persona. Ah, Sakura-chan. Seeing his finger, she glanced down at Sasuke and hastily let go of his neck, seeing his face turning blue. Sasuke started heaving right away, sucking in the much-needed oxygen with avarice. Sakura got off of him, allowing him to sit up, as he placed a hand over his chest, trying to calm his racing heart. His deadly eyes shifted to her. Bitch, were you trying to kill me? Sakura gave him a charming smile before violently grabbing his hair while disregarding his agonized cries. What was that, Sasuke-kun? You love your Sakura-chan? Aw fuck yeah. He yelled out as she grabbed his cheek. She shoved him so hard that his back smacked the floor, saying, now duck butt-kun, don't be rude. Konohamaru could not contain his shudder when emerald eyes turned to face him. You were saying Konohamaru-kun. Right. I was ordered to take up a fake persona, so that's the reason why I acted like that. The idiot you knew through the academy isn't the real me. Sasuke sat up, brushing himself off, briefly glaring at Sakura before he focused his attention on the genin. So what's the real you? Konohamaru sighed painfully before his eyes grew distant. Seeing their perplexity, he clarified, a weapon. After the Kyuubi attack, Konoha was weakened. Other countries were monitoring the leaf and there was almost a cold war between Kumogakure. So they decided that I was to become that weapon. The ace that Konoha needed. He gripped his jeans firmly. When I turned 7, I was taken from my home and put into a training facility. From there I was subjected to 2 years of intense physical and mental training to condition my body. When I turned 9, my real test began. Sasuke squinted. Sakura gasped in disbelief next to him. To control the beast inside of you? Konohamaru gave a somber nod and went on. Yeah, they wanted for me to gain control of the Kyuubi's chakra. But for some reason my body couldn't handle the corrosive chakra and I suffered a great deal of pain when I used it. For the first time in my life I failed. His navel was exposed as he carefully lowered his shirt. A seal materialized in front of their eyes as he concentrated his chakra. This is the 8 trigrams seal. Both Sakura and Sasuke leaned forward to get a better look and even Naruto looked on in interest. Consisting of 2 4-symbol seals joined together circling around a spiral, the 8 trigrams seal stood as a pinnacle of genius. Naruto had to marvel at his utterly perfect design and briefly exposed his Sharingan to see the many lines flowing with chakra. Behind it, Konohamaru's own chakra network was gradually blending into a curtain of flaming crimson. She extended her hand and recently traced the design, saying, "Wow, it looks so beautiful. To think this contains something like the Kyuubi." Konohamaru's cheeks burned as he nervously chuckled. With an embarrassed smile, she withdrew her hand and said, "Ah, Sakura-chan, that tickles." He nodded to his 2 teammates after lowering his shirt. They all nervously glanced at one another as they tried to come up with something to say. Konohamaru cleared his throat after rubbing the back of his head anxiously. So, I hope you guys don't view me differently. Sakura gave him a strong hug, and he froze. She muttered into his hair, "Idiot. How could you ever think we would view you any differently?" Konohamaru embraced the hug, slumping into her in comfort. Sasuke gave him pat on the back content to let Sakura do all the hugging. Sakura scowled, and Sasuke was thrust into their embrace before he could respond. Konohamaru said, "You guys are the best." Naruto and Riha had been watching the entire exchange quietly before they shared a small glance. Naruto raised his eyebrows seeing her teary expression and wordlessly reached into his pouch and handed her a tissue. Riha blew her nose. "Oh, that was so beautiful." Naruto rolled his eye before he stood up, stretching, gaining their attention. They agreed, pulling away from their embrace and getting ready right once. "That was truly heartwarming, but we're here for training, remember?" they said. Naruto smiled and motioned for Riha to seek shelter. "You might want to find a comfy branch so you can enjoy the show." She nodded before she kissed his cheek and winked at the trio. "Kick his butt, guys." She disappeared in a body flicker, appearing high in a tree branch, having a good view of the entire training field. Naruto's eyes smiled. "All right, kiddies, you remember the rules. Let's see how long you last, shall we?" Naruto smiled fondly at the memory before he decided that he had been on the defensive enough and it was time for some offense. He flipped forward over them at the same time, grabbing both Sasuke and Konohamaru by their shirts and using his momentum to throw them through the air. He landed gracefully but had to immediately block the strike from Sakura that was aimed for his head. Sakura was aware that her blows might now shatter bones, but the only indication that her sensei was in pain was when he tightened his eye, knocked her out, and then threw her through the air like her teammates. A pink blur knocked both lads to the ground just as they were standing up. They all sat up slowly, straining and groaning as they attempted to stop their heads from spinning. With hardly a grain of dirt on his body, Naruto was silently watching them. However, they appeared to have recently been dragged through mud because they were sweating and covered in dirt. He drawled idly, "Ma, come on guys. I'm not even breaking a sweat here." Konohamaru clenched his jaw. Well, screw you for being so strong. He was nearly unbeatable. Against him, all of their strategies and combinations were ineffective. Even worse, he publicly teased them before tossing them to the ground. Sasuke remained silent on the ground. He would admit that he had improved a heck, they all had improved by leaps and bounds over their short period of time together. He hadn't felt more powerful. Naruto was a superb instructor who imparted knowledge that he absorbed like a sponge. Sasuke greatly valued the man since he was direct, harsh, and didn't hold anything back during training. However, the distance between them appeared to widen daily and did not appear to be narrowing. Although he would never publicly acknowledge it, he was positive that Naruto was more powerful than Itachi. This man would bring him to his retribution, and he could feel it in his bones like a voice whispering at the back of his mind. He was certain that he would be prepared for Itachi if he could at least match his sensei. Despite everything, his youthful mentality was still driven by a need for vengeance. Additionally, Kami required additional training. Each defeat only fueled his rage. Naruto shook his head slowly. That's it for today, guys. You all need a. No, as Sasuke stumbled to his feet, everyone looked at him. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand before giving Naruto a determined look. The tomos started spinning quickly as his Sharingan blazed in his eye. He repeated, "No, I'm not finished yet." Sakura smiled despite her discomfort and forced herself to stand next to him as his bravery seemed to inspire his teammates. Sasuke assisted her in standing up after noticing her struggle. She grounded out, "Hell yeah. I won't quit." Konohamaru's eyes blazed red and his jaw locked as he marveled at his teammates. He tightened his headband around his head and stood shakily on his feet. Naruto saw the feral grin the boy gave him as he thumped a fist against his chest. "Quitting is something I don't do. As much as you knock us down, we'll get back up." Naruto's eyebrow reached his hairline as he watched the three of them stand on shaken legs. He could feel that their chakra reserves were low and their bodies must have been aching from his hits. They even looked like they were about to pass out. Despite it all, their determination shined in their eyes and the desire to win outlasted their pain. "Soon we'll be stronger than even you." Konohamaru thrusted his fist forwards and beside him Sasuke and Sakura grinned. "That's a promise." They echoed. Naruto stared at one face from another before he closed his eye and let a small smile form underneath his mask. Team 7. They were a special bunch. He recalled his long-ago remark to Danzo regarding the untapped potential of this generation. These children were undervalued by the village officials, but Naruto saw things that others did not. Who knows? Perhaps he was instructing the Sannin of the second generation. He smirked at the thought before he slowly lifted his hand to his headband. Sannin or not, it was time for them to learn defeat. "So you guys want to be stronger than me, eh?" He allowed his Sharingan to spin slowly in his eye. The trio took a hesitant step back as heavy pressure filled the air. A chilling breeze blew through the training grounds, sending a tingling sensation through their spines. Before that overbearing pressure suddenly began to increase to the point it became hard to breathe. Naruto's chakra rapidly began to spike at enormous levels. His form became outlined in a blue glow and the ground began to rumble. Ground and rocks in the nearby vicinity began to levitate in the air before disintegrating under the enormous pressure. The blue outline around him became brighter and brighter until it enveloped his form. Behind him his long ponytail danced in the wind and his Sharingan began to glow as his raw, powerful chakra saturated the air. "If you want to be stronger than I am, you have to realize the differences in our power." His chakra pulsed out and they were knocked off their feet as lighting sparked around his form and the breeze blowing through the air suddenly turned into a gale force. "No now. What that difference is." The terrain started to disintegrate as his already massive chakra levels started to rise once more. Naruto was surrounded by a radiance that was so intense that it was blinding. The three had to use chakra to secure their bodies to the earth in order to avoid being blown away when a hurricane wind roared through the training grounds. The trees in the vicinity were tossed into the wind and upheaved from their roots. Large chunks of landscape were leveled by the grounds heaving under the strain before they met the same end. Suddenly, lightning burst out in every direction, and the sky appeared to darken and fill with menacing clouds. For dear life, the three clung to the ground. This was not real. Never in their lives had they experienced such a high level of chakra. Even Konohamaru witnessed the landscape's destruction after being exposed to the elderly man's chakra previously. However, he had never experienced anything like this. It was unbelievable. Using the increased strength that the Kyuubi's chakra gave him, he was able to raise his head off the ground. His eyes burned from the wind's stinging feeling, and the wind rippled the flesh on his face. At what he saw, both of his eyes widened. The blue radiance totally obscured Naruto's appearance, leaving only a black silhouette. The wind danced with him as the lighting surrounding him continued to ignite. The ground beneath his feet was sunk, a tiny crater created by the tremendous pressure. However, his heart continued to beat despite all of it. His Sharingan seemed to stand out against his dark silhouette as it blazed crimson. The scorching red ball that was staring back at him was the only thing he could see through the veil that covered his form. He felt the beast within of him start to stir as raw killing intent struck his form. Never in his life had he felt so terrified. The Kyuubi opened its eyes in the murky waters beyond his cage, deep within his mindscape. It swam up to the cage, hoping that the dark waters would turn crystal blue so that the black sky above could be seen. The moon's crimson appeared to glow like blood as it started to bleed the dark sky into an ominous red, and the clouds that had previously drifted lazily across the sky were now moving quickly. The beast clamped his hands down on the cage's bars and squeezed. The seemingly impenetrable bars developed a little dent. The Kyuubi grinned from behind his prison. Naruto. Indeed, he is the one. He had sensed it as soon as he saw him. He was the real descendant because his chakra even affected the boy's mindscape. In all his life, he had only experienced such a chakra in one human. The Kyuubi's growl reverberated across the vacant mindscape as it tilted its massive head back and opened its massive jaws. In the actual world, Konohamaru's stomach started to burn. As his body began to react to Naruto's chakra, whisker marks appeared on his face and his features became more savage. The hurricane's wind gradually subsided and the black sky started to clear as the formidable Junin stopped his show of strength. The outline surrounding his form disappeared as his massive chakra levels dropped to their typical suppressed levels. Konohamaru's face returned to normal, and he blinked as the burn subsided. The other members of Team 7 gently raised their heads from the ground, looking first at Naruto's expressionless face and then at the surroundings. Their mouths fell gaping. They had destroyed their training ground. The trees in the area were twisted at strange angles, and some of them periodically fell to the ground. There was wood debris all over the place, and the terrain had been leveled and severely damaged by the quick lightning strikes. Naruto was gazed at with wide eyes by 3 sets of eyes. He smiled at them while stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Ma, I think I went a little overboard." Before anyone could speak, they heard retching sounds and witnessed Riha stagger out of the trees, falling to her knees and seemed largely uninjured except from throwing up. In an instant, Naruto was at her side, with Team 7 following slowly as he attempted to assist the woman in standing. "Riha-chan, what's wrong?" Naruto trailed off as he sensed incoming chakra signatures. Suddenly, 2 combat-ready Anbu platoons and a group of heavily armed military police materialized. Naruto raised a hand. "Oh, my bad guys. Just a false alarm." Before Naruto could react, a well-known cat approached Anbu and gave him an upside-down head smack. 3 people's mouths fell open for the second time that day. "Naruto-senpai. You put the whole village on a level 1 alert, again. What was that?" "Yes, the hamlet would be ready for a skirmish and the entire military would mobilize. Rapid deployment teams were dispatched to locate and eradicate the threat, civilians were evacuated to their homes, and so on. The entire country probably felt your chakra." Naruto scratched his head carefully, looking like a kick puppy. "Geez, Cat-chan, I was just giving a little demonstration, eh?" She interrupted him, saying, "Your genin were present. What did you want to do, kill them?" Naruto grinned. "No doubt, but the little buggers said they wanted to be stronger than me, so I just showed them the measuring ladder." Based on their expressions, they were aware that the climb would be extremely difficult. Yugo sighed beneath her mask. Naruto was occasionally worse than Kakashi. She turned to face the soldiers and waved them away. False alarm. While many shinobi relaxed and shed their rigid shapes, some Anbu remained vigilant and chose to keep a safe distance from Naruto. She rolled her eyes and then fingered the radio in her ear to give the Junin commander straight directions. "This is Anbu Squad Leader Cat, of Alpha Squad. Reporting that level 1 alert can be lowered. I repeat, level 1 alert can be lowered. False alarm." She released the gadget and returned her focus to Naruto after receiving a positive response over the radio. Naruto grinned. He gestured to the blonde sitting next to him and said, "My apologies for the alarm. But I need a medic ASAP." Yugo indicated to one of the female policemen while nodding. After giving a sign of approval, the brown-haired woman knelt in front of the panting blonde and ran glowing green hands over her body. "Okay, hun. What's the problem?" Riha was gasping for air. Her face had turned pale, and her brow was covered in sweat. "My stomach heavy hurts." The medic hummed. My diagnostics are telling me you're physically unharmed, but I'm getting nausea build up in your stomach and your nerves are going haywire. Intense preparation and alleviated heartbeat shows signs of extreme." She trailed off, locking gazes with Riha. Everyone's gaze shifted to Naruto, who was closely examining her. He could feel her chakra shifting erratically and her elevated pulse rate as his Sharingan slowly swirled in his eye. He turned his head and watched as the medic's chakra briefly became disturbed before disappearing just as fast. What just took place? The woman was calmed by the medic using her calming chakra. Breathe slowly, please. Your heart rate is beating too fast. Any faster and you'll go into shock. With a gradual nod, Riha started to relax her stiff body. Her heart rate eventually decreased and her breathing became more relaxed. She caught Naruto's gaze over the top of the medic's head and gave him a tiny smile. He didn't give it back. The stiff posture and elevated heart rate weren't unexpected. He had sensed her chakra about to go crazy prior to his brief display of force. He initially believed it to be shock, but even after he was done, he could still feel her chakra shifting dangerously. It was almost as if she was scared. Of what? Had she been afraid of him? Caused her to become so terrified that she began throwing up? There was a problem. Naruto-kun. After hearing the quiet murmur, Naruto turned to face the cat-masked Anbu and followed her gently as she guided him away from the group. With some solitude at last, Yugo spoke to him directly. Geez, Naruto-kun, not only did you scare my squad but your own girlfriend too. What are you, some type of sadist? She laughed. Naruto laughed. He sincerely said, I'm really sorry about the alarm. Under her mask, Yugo grinned. They both chuckled softly before Yugo scowled beneath her mask. Yeah, you made the higher-ups nearly shit themselves. People thought a tailed beast was attacking from all that chakra. She partially removed her mask, leaving it hanging off the side of her face, using his towering figure to obstruct any bystander's view. Dark eyes looked up at him gravely, and Naruto arched an eyebrow. Are the rumors true about you and the Hokage? Oh. For such private information to leak, he would assume that there was a mole in the Anbu force. He was positive that the old man would not allow the events of that evening to go public. Riha was the only person Naruto had told, but he had faith in her. Correct. Before he knew it, the entire military was chatting about how the Yellow Fang had assaulted the Hokage and destroyed an entire Anbu army. Rumors in any concealed town have a tendency to spread more quickly than wildfires. Which was not the case. In part. Naruto let out a sigh. What did you hear? Her eyes widened when he remained silent. That you cut through the Anbu guard platoon like knife through butter and broke the Hokage's jaw, which is all untrue. Right, Naruto-kun? She asked. Tell me it isn't true, Naruto. Naruto shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, but it is. Before her eyes showed agony, Yugo flinched a little. What are you doing, Naruto? Why? Why do this? You can be put to death for Kami's sake. She would never be able to forgive herself if something were to happen to him. Although she was aware that he was an adult, the relationships their Anbu team had created would last a lifetime. She also promised to keep an eye on him a long time ago. The expression in his eye nearly made her retreat. The old man can do nothing. He can't even sue me even if he wanted to. Yugo gave him a perplexed expression. What happened? Naruto let out a sigh. The less people who knew, the better. I can't tell you. At least not here. He would put his life in Yugo's hands. During his Anbu days, she assisted Kakashi in raising him. However, he had to at least let her know what she was up against. Her eyes tightened in hurt and rage. Yugo, I'll tell you everything when we meet. But I have to know right now, that I can trust you. What? You questioning my trust, Naru? She said, becoming motionless as her gaze met his Sharingan and a brief mental exchange occurred. If it weren't for the hands around her waist, she would have lost her balance as her eyes became wide at him. Can I trust you, Yugo? She asked, hesitating before slowly nodding after noticing the unspoken appeal in his gaze. Naruto kissed her forehead and almost sagged with relief. Thank you, Yugo-chan. She gave him a firm hug after grinning at him. You already know I'll stand by your side, Naruto. Captain. The two broke apart at the yell, and Yugo quickly put on her mask and turned to face her subordinate. Command wants us to report back to HQ. She nodded in acceptance. She cleared her throat and started barking commands, saying, Roger that. The shinobi contingent started to scatter. Okay everyone, you heard the man. Back to HQ. After whispering a few things to Riha, the medical officer also vanished, leaving only Yugo. The female Anbu silently observed the genin fussing over the blonde woman. So that's the girl who stole your heart. Sakura attempted to straighten Riha's hair while Naruto continued to watch her. Yeah. What's her name? Riha. Yugo scowled beneath her mask. Naruto looked at the cat-masked Anbu and then returned his focus to the blonde. saying, "Riha Riha. Where have I heard that name before?" Everyone knows her. His blonde lover was undoubtedly well known to those who knew him. Yugo shook her head slowly. She could have sworn that one of the Iwajunin inmates at the headquarters a few years prior had mentioned meeting this blonde woman. No, I mean I heard her name somewhere before. But for some reason, the man couldn't recall her face. Chakra scans of his skull revealed residual chakra from a certain mind technique, suggesting that his mind had been largely erased. She was good, whomever she was. It took a professional to entice an A-class Junin. However, this girl couldn't be the same. Naruto was completely focused on Yugo. After giving it some thought, the female Anbu waved him away and ignored the memory. "Where?" she asked. "It's nothing. Probably just confusing her with someone else." After a few moments of staring, Naruto nodded slowly in agreement. "If you say so." Yugo nodded to him after grinning up at him. "I'll see you later, Naruto-senpai." She vanished in front of him with a chakra flicker. 3 Genin and Junin approached his form in silence. The uncomfortable calm was broken by Konohamaru's query. "Okay sensei, why in the actual fuck are you so strong?" With a grimace on his face, Sasuke nodded next to him and said, "I mean holy shit, you nearly killed us from that." He glared and said, "So that's you true power, huh? You've been holding back this entire time." Sakura jabbed a finger into his chest. "Yeah, even poor Riha-san was affected by that." The blonde woman caught everyone's attention. Her face flushed as she saw all the attention. "I told you guys I was feeling sick previously. I had nausea from the previous day." The three of them chuckled at her humiliation. "Why are you lying?" Their laughter was cut off by Naruto's soft voice. He stared blankly at the woman, making the 3 Genin suspicious. Although they had occasionally witnessed their disagreement, they had never seen Naruto gaze at the woman in that manner. "Ever since I met you, you never showed no signs of nausea or sickness. You always keep your body in perfect shape and occasionally balance your nutrients. Never once had you ever been sick. Yesterday you weren't sick. This morning you weren't sick. The week before that you weren't sick." Feeling as though they were intruding on a private moment, the three took tentative steps back. "What's going on, Riha?" A pair of eyes looked to the blonde woman as Naruto's query echoed in silence. She pushed a lock of hair behind her ear anxiously. What? Naruto-kun," she said, lowering her head and muttering something as her eyes strayed from his. "Pardon?" asked Naruto. "I said you're scaring me?" It wasn't just Naruto who was perplexed. His emotion was matched by his entire crew. Naruto gave her a sidelong glance. He was clearly sarcastic when he said, "I scared you enough to make you start to puke? You, a seasoned Junin? Puking under a display of power?" he asked, raising an eyebrow while he awaited her answer. After giving him a long look, Riha carefully raised a hand to cover her stomach. "I'm sorry." Naruto continued to stare. With a sorrowful smile, she slowly raised her hand and said, "For lying to you." She gave him a cautious smile as she noticed his eyes stray to her stomach before returning to her face. "I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, so I just told the medic I was having some nausea." Naruto abruptly became motionless, leaving Team 7 staring in bewilderment. His eyebrows stayed fixed on her face, reaching his hairline. Sasuke looked from one face to another, utterly bewildered. "What's going on?" Riha stared at Sasuke after letting her gaze stray from Naruto. For the third time that day, his mouth dropped open at what he heard next. "I'm pregnant." "That's a load of bullshit." Everyone in the surrounding jumped when Naruto whispered softly. He focused solely on the blonde woman in front of him, ignoring everything and everyone else around him. His logical mind began to focus after he overcame his first astonishment at the shocking news, and he was not instantly persuaded that the woman in front of him was pregnant. The seal he put on himself could not possibly be malfunctioning. Its job was to get rid of any sperm cells that got into the vagina during ejaculation. It was in good functioning order and wouldn't fade for the following 10 years, according to his most recent check. He had to break the seal for her to become pregnant. Something he had no intention of doing anytime soon. That's why Team 7 gasped in disbelief as Naruto's hand seized Riha's throat and she was lifted into the air, leaving her feet hanging. Sakura started to come forward, but Konohamaru's severe expression stopped her. "Sensei, what are you doing?" Sakura exclaimed. He only shook his head, clearly perplexed. The team's Uchiha stayed silent, looking from one adult to another while the Sharingan's Tomo slowly whirled in his eyes. As Naruto pulled Riha higher into the air until his line of sight was directly in front of her pelvis. The hand tightening around her throat muffled her voice. His Sharingan spun quickly, focusing sharper and sharper as he peered into her chakra flow, deep enough to see the small chakra-coated cells slowly moving through her circulation. What he saw caused his eyes to narrow into slits. As Naruto opened his fingers and released his hold, Riha fell to the ground motionless, her face starting to turn blue from the lack of air. In an attempt to get the vital oxygen into her lungs, she coughed dryly and heaved frantically, gripping her throat. Team 7 watched cautiously. Riha pushed herself up on her palms while Naruto slowly dropped to one knee and stared straight into her face. He gazed blankly at her baby blue, sad eyes. As he drew in closer, his masked nose barely touching hers, she trailed off, "And Naruto what are you? How long have you been pregnant?" In response, she stammered, "What a?" His blade entered the earth exactly where Riha's fingers were, causing her to almost squeak. Naruto showed his teeth beneath his mask, Sharingan blazing a fiery red. "How long?" He clenched his teeth, causing Riha to tremble under his intense gaze. Team 7 swallowed as his murderous purpose began to seep into the atmosphere, creating the uncomfortable pressure they had experienced moments before. 1 week. Naruto's eyebrows wrinkled as he drew himself up to his full, imposing height and stared down at her. The afternoon sun was shining directly behind him, giving him a golden glow, and the fiery red of his Sharingan emphasized his shape, making Riha shudder. "Why don't I believe you now?" To Riha's mounting fear, Naruto asked a scary question as he slowly ran his thumb down his sword, drawing blood. The blade was left imprinted in the ground where he had previously slammed it as he started to carefully go through hand seals. Summoning Jutsu. A tiny pug with a slight frown on his face emerged from the smoke pile. "Oh no, bad timing, boss." Pakun tailed off as soon as he sensed the animosity in the air, glancing first at a stern-faced Naruto, then at a tearful-eyed Riha, and finally at a cautious-looking Genin. "I was chasing some squirrels in." He murmured softly, yo." When no one responded, he scowled. "Okay. What's going on, boss?" He spoke to Naruto, who had not once looked away from Riha. The blonde Junin cocked his head in Riha's direction without saying anything. "Tell me if she's pregnant." At that, Pakun's eyes widened and he almost choked on his own saliva. "Are you pregnant?" "The hell?" he said, turning to face Riha. "Is this a joke of any kind because Thisa?" "Pakun." The pug stiffened at the sound of Naruto's severe voice and looked up at his icy glare, realizing that this was no joke and that Naruto was serious. His eyes never left the Riha's figure as the woman shuddered under his unyielding gaze. Pakun swallowed. Naruto wouldn't ever hesitate since he had witnessed the two of them together and how happy their relationship had made him, but he knew the blonde deep inside and had witnessed him at his worst. Pakun fought the impulse to tremble. With a nod of approval, he trotted slowly up to the sprawled woman, paused in front of her, staring blankly up into her blue eyes, and then glanced back at Naruto. He shook his head slowly, then leaned his nose down to her pelvis area and took deep sniffs, causing the woman to flush despite the nose poking her private area. The quiet was excruciating. The inspection continued for a few minutes, and when Pakun finally finished, Team 7 looked at Naruto and saw that he was motionless and unblinking. The pug moved away from the woman and stared up into her face. Riha remained motionless under his gaze, but her expression was revealed by the perspiration on her brow. Pakun then turned away and trotted back to Naruto. Naruto silently awaited the pug's response while staring him down. "I can smell a fetus growing in her womb." A chakra pulse struck everyone nearby, causing them to jump. With lightning sparking around his form, Naruto growled before pacing the training ground in a furious manner, his hands tugging at his hair and his muttering full of curses. His team shuddered as he released so much killing intent. As Naruto roamed the grounds, Riha slowly stood up and watched him. She was going to move forward when a growl stopped her, causing her to look down. When a feral-looking Pakun bared his teeth, Team 7's eyes widened. "If you want to lose that leg, take another step." They had never seen the amiable dog appear so vicious. Riha scowled but did not move. Sitting on his hind legs, Pakun quietly trotted up to Naruto as he paced. "Boss," he whispered, catching his master's attention, but Naruto continued to pace, glancing at Pug out of the corner of his eye. The pug scowled as he watched Naruto walk, his form sparkling with light and his stride like an enraged tiger. Naruto appeared ready to kill, and his mind was racing a million miles per hour. He didn't believe that this woman was carrying his child, even though he saw it with his own eyes and had Pakun's strong nose check. He stopped abruptly. "Hold on a damn second." Shay the Thunder God marker on his back started to pulse, and he leapt. He could feel his shadow clone's dangerously low chakra levels and scowled in concern as it appeared as though it would disappear at any moment, keeping the flow of chakra steady to his seal ready for Naruto to instantly teleport. He was visually aware of the surroundings where any marker was placed, but his mind was consumed by the image of his shadow clone. Morse code pulses came quickly. T, L, E, P, O, R, T, N, O, W, R, O, O, T, A, G, E, N, T, circa A, U, G, H, T. Naruto. At last, Naruto turned to face the little dog, and Pakun said, I know you're angry, but my nose doesn't lie. You must. Wait. Naruto focused all of his attention on Sasuke, who had remained silent the entire time he watched the interaction. His Sharingan slowly twirled in his eye as he stared at Riha, a frown growing on his face, and he slowly started to approach. As Naruto approached him, Sasuke continued to focus on the woman, giving her a look that would have made his ancestor proud. When that medic was healing you, I saw her chakra become disturbed, Sasuke said in a voice as cold as steel. Naruto squinted his eyes in memory, dismissing the chakra disruption as medical chakra interfering with her network because he had seen it but was too far away to explain. However, Sasuke was by her side the whole time. Her hands stiffened and her chakra momentarily changed. Everyone looked at the blonde, whose eyes were widening with fear. If I hadn't been paying attention to the way your chakra imprinted in her mind, I would have missed it. It's a mind-erasing technique that I've witnessed before. Everyone in the room was stunned into silence by the revelation, and even Pakun was speechless. Naruto's eyes were furrowed as he saw her wide blue eyes contact his, realizing that it was Truea using a mind-erasing jutsu on a police medic so swiftly and covertly without anybody noticing was no easy task. Okay, enough with your bullshit, Naruto said, taking a menacing step forward. I'm looking for answers, now. With every stride he made, Riha gradually started to retreat. What are you talking about, Naruto? Being a father should make you happy, right? With hesitation, she inquired. With his eyes narrowed to slits, Naruto silently raised his hand, his blade rising from the floor and levitating into his open palm, the Kusunagi blade glinting dangerously in the afternoon sun as it extended to its full length. You must be stupid, if you think I believe that child is mine. The news caused Team 7 to gasp, and Pakun grimaced before growling. After gaining some distance, Riha halted, her terrified, crying face turning to one of blank empathy, and she sighed gently, shaking her blonde hair. It appears that I've been discovered. How unfortunate. Naruto squinted, thinking, what the hell was she talking about now? More lies. He forced himself not to rub his face. She was caught red-handed, and talking would only make things worse. How did you get pregnant? Naruto began, moving cautiously forward, but his team stopped when he gave them a warning look. He needed answers. He knew the child wasn't his, so who was it? He was positive she couldn't have been raped or anything, so the only possible explanation was that she had cheated on him. In any case, he would murder the perpetrator while she watched. A lazy smirk curved around Riha's lips as she rested a palm on her hip, unfazed by the impending peril. Don't you want to know? When she saw Naruto's narrowed eyes and quickened his pace, she started to smile softly. Is that envy I see, Naruto-kun? Would it cheer you up if I told you that he was larger than you? She purred. Naruto's shape blurred across the training field as his stroll evolved into a sprint. He wasn't a doctor, but he could practice performing an abortion on her. Let's see if she maintained that smirk as he sliced her open. He prepared to sever one of her legs with his sword, but he didn't want to kill her just yet. Instead, he wanted to paralyze her and He froze. Sasuke's eyes tightened as he glanced at Naruto's chakra flow and saw a foreign chakra source begin to develop. Team 7's eyes had widened as Naruto had abruptly began charging the woman, but they were thrown into uncertainty when he suddenly paused. A deceptively lovely smile appeared on Riha's face as her hands were raised into a seal. Naruto let out a grunt as his sword dropped from his hands, his body immobilized due to the disruption of his chakra. He looked down at his body and noticed black markings beginning to spread throughout his form. His eyes furrowed as he recognized the jutsu's owner. The binding seal of Danzo. Riha caught his gaze as she lowered her hands as the binding seal she had applied to him formed, and he looked forward to see the blonde woman raising her hands into the ram seal. When Naruto realized that Riha Wasa, he growled angrily. His clone, which was running on the last of its chakra, was dispelled, and he shuddered as a sudden rush of memories hit him. His mind reeled as 3 days' worth of information resonated in his head. If it weren't for his frozen body, Naruto would have collapsed. All of the events that his shadow clone went through were quickly dumped into his head, and his brain was working non-stop as it attempted to short the rapid amount of information, giving him a sharp migraine. Suddenly, all of the discomfort he was experiencing went away. When the facts in his thoughts began to make sense, his eyes widened uncontrollably, and he turned to face Riha. As their gazes locked, time appeared to stop between them. Riha. Riha's eyes briefly widened as she saw his Sharingan transform into 3 stretched triangles that were evenly spaced around the center pupil, each curving at the top to form a circle that resembled a pinwheel. The betrayal on his face was visible even with his mask on, and he was so engrossed that he ignored the burning sensation in his eye. Naruto was unaware of it. Pakun growled as he saw Naruto freeze, and Team 7 went after him, with Sasuke leading the way with a ferocious snarl. Despite not being a battle type among the ninja hounds, Riha gave Naruto a sly smile before jumping back when Pakun approached her. The pug leapt for her face, his teeth snapping like a swift animal, and he would take on a cage if he saw Naruto in danger. Riha dodged his attacks skillfully, palming a kunai and swiping at the pug's neck. Pakun rolled through the air to avoid the swipe and landed away from her growling. Riha smirked at him before she turned her head just in time to dodge the kunai that would have pierced her head. She flicked the kunai in her hand, aiming for Konohamaru, but it was knocked off course. As the woman formed a seal, Sasuke quickly fired a series of shuriken at her, and as she parried each one, a steel tanto appeared in her hand in a cloud of smoke. Sasuke's kunai was aimed at her neck, but she leapt back just in time to avoid it. With his balance off, she slashed forward with her tanto, aiming for his eyes. She had no time to stop as both boys blitzed forward. Sasuke's Sharingan spun rapidly, slowing down his perception of time. He ducked the blow, bending to level his back horizontal, smirking when he felt Konohamaru use him as leverage, leaping off his back, striking forward with a kunai in his hand, swiping at her face. She bent backwards just enough for the kunai to nick her hair, allowing for Konohamaru to sail over her. Sasuke grimaced at her flexibility and speed. She was good. She suddenly backflipped, palms on the ground, extending her feet rapidly, clipping Sasuke in the jaw and hitting Konohamaru right between his legs, sending both boys flying opposite of each other. Sasuke and Konohamaru both grunted as they hit the ground, the former landing on his back and the latter his stomach. As they tugged on a set of wires, they both grinned. Riha scowled and looked down to discover a wire that was almost invisible tying her feet. Cha! Both boys smirked as Riha's face contorted under Sakura's blow. Her eyes were wide open in shock and spit flew from her mouth as she was sent flying from the impact. Riha impacted the ground harshly before using her momentum to roll herself to her feet. Her beautiful face was marked by the small imprint of a fist, the skin around it turning an ugly shade of purple. She lightly rolled her tongue, tasting blood, before she frowned. She raised her hand and spat a tooth into her palm. Glaring at the Team 7, she crushed the tooth in her hand. Standing side by side in front of their paralyzed sensei, the genin returned her glare full force. Konohamaru let the Kyuubi's chakra mix with his own, turning his brown eyes red. His slitted eyes narrowed at the woman in front of him. There's only one person I know who uses that same binding seal. Both his teammates briefly glanced at him, keeping their attention on Riha. So you're Root, he said with a snarl. Sakura scowled. Root? It's a secret faction of the Anbu that should have been disbanded. A man named Danzo Shimura is the official leader. Sasuke felt his anger rise at the name. So he was the leader of that organization. Danzo. He would like to ask the man about a missing nin who was formerly a part of his Anbu faction. Big words from the failed experiment, Riha said, casting him a pitying glance. Like the animal you are, they ought to have simply put you in a cage. Her comments caused Konohamaru to snarl, and then his eyes widened. Wait. Why you? Riha smirked, her eyes taking on a smug look. So, you do recall, do you? But how much do I wonder? She said, cocking her hip. Have you ever wondered why your father abandoned you? I must say, you Sarutobi men are as wild as the monkeys you raise, she said, smiling as she saw the tears welling up in his eyes. Naruto growled at her, his voice full of fury, his eyes narrowing at the possibilities. You fucking whore. You dare not. Naruto's wide eyes were fixed on Konohamaru, but she ignored him. No, he stammered, it's not true. I can't even blame him, she said with a smile. Sorry, but he couldn't keep his hands off of me. He had to return home to a boy who had become a monster and a wife who was crying all the time. I just gave him what he wanted, she said, licking her lips. He needed release. Before his body started to tremble, Konohamaru let the tears that were streaming down his face to quickly disappear as the Kyuubi's chakra began to burn. His form glowed red and an intense killing intent rolled off of him. Opening his mouth, he let out a bestial roar before he charged forward. Sasuke tried to grab him, but the enraged genin was too fast. Konohamaru was before the woman in a flash, his hand cocked back and ready to smash her face in. Riha ducked the blow, slicing at his arm with her tanto. Konohamaru didn't flinch or give any indication he felt pain as he attacked like a wild animal. His form was sloppy and wild, his anger hindering his attacks. With every blow he missed, he received slices to his muscles and tendons, leaving his form bloody. She snapped her leg forward, snapping his head back, dropping him, and griped her tanto, ready to slice his throat. As his neck began to swell with chakra, Sasuke was already flashing through hand seals and breathing. Phoenix Flower Jutsu. Fire release. A volley of small fireballs spewed out of his mouth, arcing around Konohamaru's downed form, locked onto the traitorous blonde. She backflipped, skillfully dodging them before flipping through hand seals of her own. Water wall. Water release. A shield of water appeared, blocking the rest of the fireballs, coating the area in a cloud of steam. Riha used the moisture in the air to her advantage, inhaling the steam. Blitzing through hand seals, she returned the favor, sending a volley of water balls at Sasuke. Sasuke's Sharingan rapidly spun, and with great reflexes he dodged all of them, twirling gracefully. He wasn't prepared as Riha spat out a huge ball of water that rocketed towards him. His eyes widened and he quickly managed to spew out some flames, but they were snuffed out by the water, and spit flew from his mouth as the water hit him like a bullet. The crash sent him flying. The sight made Konohamaru lose his wrath, and he leapt in time to catch Sasuke, grunting as he did so. The two boys collapsed in a heap, with Sasuke clutching his damaged stomach and grinding his teeth in agony as he removed his shirt to show the damage caused by the pressurized water ball. He was certain that the pressure attack had shattered a rib, and the skin around his stomach had turned a mixture of purple and crimson. Sakura had a frown on her face as the nimble lady danced around her, caught her wrist, and turned the girl around with an arm behind her back. Riha squinted her eyes, seeing just two genin, and dodged the attack from behind. Little girls shouldn't pretend to play ninja, Sakura-chan, Sakura hissed as the lady licked her ear, grinding her teeth together before spitting on her feet. Sakura whimpered in pain as the woman wrenched her arm. Slut. Go suck a dia. Riha tsked and pulled her arm, saying, what a bad-mouthed girl. Didn't her parents teach her to treat her elders with respect? She wrenched the arm so much that Sakura's eyes began to well up with tears, and when she saw both males stand up, she motioned for them to halt. Please move if you want me to break Sakura's arm like a twig. With joy, she said. Both Sasuke and Konohamaru came to a halt. Their bodies were bruised and appeared worn out. Sasuke was tending to his stomach, while Konohamaru had bloody wounds that were gradually healing. With a sly smile, Riha turned to face a furious Naruto, blowing him a kiss while laughing at the expression in his eyes. Ah, you upset Naruto-kun. If looks could kill, his gaze alone would have killed her long ago. As Naruto battled the curse seal, his body jerked with anger. Bitch, I'll skin you alive if you harm them. He was in mental agony despite his anger. This lady was nothing more than a seductress and spy sent by Danzo to obtain his DNA. He couldn't decide which was more repulsive, the number of men and women she had slept with or the fact that he had loved her. Sasuke scoffed at her expression as she turned to face the lads after twisting Sakura's arms and winking at Naruto's. Why, Riha? Why would you betray sensei? His motions awoke his shattered ribs, and he growled before coughing. Riha looked blankly at the two and sighed, saying, you are all so naïve to think I'm the same woman you knew since we met. I'm a seductress. I'm sent in to either spy on or kill. To be honest, I never liked any of you and I never gave a damn about any of you. She concluded by giving them a mocking look of sympathy. But I'll admit, I did feel sorry for you lot. So that time you met me in the bar. Naruto scoffed at her. Did you begin your task at that point? What happened next surprised everyone present. Riha titled her head back and laughed long and hard. She laughed so hard that she had to wipe away the tears that hard started to form. Despite everything, the sound was pleasant to the ears, fake as the personality that she had used to fool them all. Riha took a few moments to compose herself, holding Sakura. Oh, Naruto-kun. She shook her head. You're so pathetic. Both boys bristled at jab and even Sakura managed to glare up at her. She ignored them, focusing on Naruto. You were the easiest prey I ever had. I mean, I wasn't even trying. What a poor bastard you are, to be so respected, so feared, yet at the same time so lonely and isolated. It makes sense why your life was so awful. Everything about you, including your weakness, was so simple to find out. Imagine that I put a binding seal on you and you were completely unaware of it. You must have been in a dire situation. I suppose the adage, all men are dogs, is accurate, she grinned. They will become submissive little slaves to your every desire if you pet them properly. Look at Big Bad Team 7, Riha said, laughing at the looks on everyone's faces. How does it feel to realize that all of you are just as pitiful as your sensei? As I said, I feel sorry for all Ofa. Pakun's jaws snapped around Sakura's ankle as a small body suddenly burst out of the dirt beneath her feet. Riha screamed, releasing Sakura from her grasp and swiping at the pug with her tanto. Sakura instantly pivoted and used her uninjured arm to strike the blade from her grip. This bitch was dead. The instant she began disparaging the one guy they held in the highest regard, she was doomed to an extremely agonizing demise. Sasuke and Konohamaru took the opportunity and charged forward, ignoring their agony. Sakura cocked her fist to send the woman flying with an uppercut, but she was struck so hard that her nose broke and she fell to the ground in a heap. Riha snarled and stomped on the pug so hard that something cracked before she kicked the small body away. Just as the boys were about to attack her, she flashed through hand seals, causing both of them to freeze. Konohamaru and Sasuke shook as the knives poked at their throats, and both genin locked up as the woman's chakra invaded their nerve systems. To their horror, the kunai in their hands began to turn against each other. Despite her promiscuous nature, she was one of Danzu's best, considered even better than her brother because of her talent with her clan's techniques. Her mental prowess could even be considered telekinetic. Riha smirked before dropping her hands. That should hold you for now. She grimaced before tenderly rubbing her wounded ankle. That damn dog. Thank Kami it had been only Pakun. She didn't think she would be able to handle all his ninja hounds together. Speaking of the dog, she had wondered if he had disappeared, but the sneaky pug had been hiding. He was of no importance now. She retrieved her fallen tanto, smirking down at Sakura. She roughly kicked the girl in her side, getting her to whimper. Sakura grunted as a foot stomped on her stomach. Unforgiving, Riha stomped harder and harder to the point Sakura began to cough out blood. Both genin and sensei watched helpless as the young girl was ruthlessly stomped on till her ribs gave way to the force. Sakura turned to the side and puked out blood, heaving as her body shook. Riha sighed, stroking her hair before she turned to a tearful Naruto. Ah, is the yellow fang going to cry? She prepared to puncture Sakura's throat with her sword. Cease. Keep them out of this. This is between you and me, Naruto yelled frantically. Riha just shook her head. Naruto, you should realize now that your life is nothing but failures. She held up her 4 fingers, ticking them down. I mean, your parents died, your sibling died, your sensei died, and now you have to watch your students die, she finished smugly. Naruto's body quivered. You fucking bitch, I'll murder you, I swear, I'll cut you to pieces, you whore. How are you going to do that? Riha asked, laughing. Oh, how I loved the old names, she asked lightly. Naruto sneered under the mask. I'll gut you just like I did your brother. He would have laughed at her expression. She had immediately lost her smiling face and adopted one of complete seriousness. Her baby blue eyes narrowed at him. Naruto grinned underneath his mask. That's right. I really screwed him up. Every time I sliced through a mature man's head, you should have seen how he groaned like a bitch. Left him so terrified that he would never be able to clean his own ass. That's how you found out, Riha realized, blinking. Fu, she muttered. If not for the seal, Naruto would have nodded. You're correct, Fu. He puts the F, I assure you. I'm fucked since that's what he is at the moment. However, I'm going to kill your brother and make you watch as I torture him alive, he said, his form twitching furiously as the Mangekyo Sharingan started to shine. But I'm not going to employ genjutsu this time. No, I'm going to pull your fucking eyes out with just my bare hands. Tear you apart limb from limb, then shove that fetus down your fucking throat till you choke to death, you root slut. In an attempt to slow down his pounding heart, Naruto heaved tensely, his body trembling. Riha blinked back the threatening tears in her eyes before her pretty face schooled of emotion. She wordlessly held up a handseal and both Sasuke and Konohamaru began to panic as the knives edged closer to their throats. Bearing an insane grin, she stared at Naruto. Well, let's see how tough you are after you witness your precious students kill each other. Sasuke used sheer willpower alone to try and hold his knife back, but it was a losing battle. Konohamaru growled before his eyes bled red, and he used his enhanced strength to try and hold the knife, as it began to pierce the skin on their necks. "Cease!" Naruto cried out. Seeing she wasn't listening, he snarled. "Damn it, I'll tell you where your brother is." Riha finally acknowledged Naruto but still held up the ram sign. "Why should I?" After a moment, she asked, and Naruto gave her a sneer. "If you kill them, you'll never see your brother again. I can assure you of that." "You'll tell me where he is or I'll kill your brats," she growled in return. She yelled. If it weren't for his mask, Naruto would have spat on the ground. "Bitch, please? Would you truly put a task ahead of your only sibling's safety? If you fail, won't Danzo kill you both?" "That's right, I know everything," he said, smugly observing her expression. "You say I'm lonely, but the only person you have left is that jerk. You won't see him again if you don't let my students go." When Naruto noticed Pakun approaching from behind, he remained expressionless. Riha narrowed her eyes at him before she dropped her seal. Both Sasuke and Konohamaru gave a sigh of relief as their hands lowered. That was close way to close. Konohamaru wanted to Naruto's eyes went wide as the Riha grinned and held up her seal again. With a crazed glint her eye, she laughed and activated her jutsu. Slick. Konohamaru blinked, staring into Sasuke's wide eyes. Seeing his reflection in the Sharingan, he witnessed blood running out of his mouth and glanced down to see Sasuke's kunai had pierced him directly in the heart. Sasuke watched as Konohamaru gave a bloody cough before his form stepped back, free of Riha's control. Konohamaru slowly lifted his hand over his heart before he shuddered and fell backwards, impacting the ground lifelessly. Sasuke disregarded everything around him, even Naruto's yells and the way Pakun had leapt onto Riha's arm and begun chewing with all of his might, as he observed his best friend lying still on the ground. "A dumb little brother." The words resonated through his mind and a searing heat stirred from within. The last thing Sasuke felt was an intense burn before he saw black. Naruto watched Sasuke fall shortly after Konohamaru and willed back his burning eyes. Pakun was still attached to her arm and the crazed woman was punching him with all her strength. Naruto watched as Pakun kept up his grip, snarling with each hit. His gaze turned to Sakura, the girl having lost unconsciousness from her pain, and then to both Konohamaru and Sasuke. Tears ran down his eyes as he witnessed the state of his team. It was his fault. All his fault. First it was the Hokage, then Danzo, and now the woman that he had loved. Why? What had he ever done to deserve this? Having his life ruined by the people around him. The village that he had protected for all his life was his worst enemy. His parents sacrificed their life to save this very village, and in return their only son was tormented like he was in a living hell. Naruto bit back a sob. "Dispel, Pakun. Dispel," he commanded. But the dog didn't obey. He just kept his jaws locked, ignoring her blows. The pack was in Dangara, it was his duty to protect it with his life. Naruto is his master and Team 7 his students. They were entitled his protection even if it killed him. It was the rule of law for dogs. Riha, fed up with the annoying pug, palmed a kunai and stabbed Pakun. The pug gave a pained whimper but didn't let go and was subjected to repeated stabs. Slick. 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 Naruto shuddered as he watched. "Damn it, Dispel." His voice broke and he whimpered as he watched Pakun drop lifelessly to the ground. His shiny brown fur was stained with blood and the blue vest he wore had turned purple. Naruto watched as the headband the pug wore untied, clattering to the ground. He remained still. Riha dropped the bloody kunai and let out a hiss, glancing at her mangled arm. How she hated dogs. The meat of her arms was showing and her skin was mangled down to the bone. Her once beautiful skin was left hanging from the side, coated in blood and teeth. She sneered down at the pug before she kicked the small body, sending it rolling. She was frozen in place by a piercing, murderous purpose, and she gasped as her trembling eyes shifted to Naruto. His Sharingan started to spin, and Riha stepped away from the expression in his eye. "I'll kill you. I'll murder you. I'll murder you." Naruto kept up the mantra, heaving as his body began to tremble. He roared, using every ounce of his strength, and his body began to move. Riha gawked in shock, witnessing the impossible. He was overcoming the curse seal through sheer rage. Naruto kept repeating the mantra, ignoring the burn of his muscles, till the lines on his body started to flicker. Inch by inch his body began to move. Before long, his shape started to move gradually in her direction as he took a huge stride forward, leaving his foot embedded in the ground. He appeared to be death personified, howling like a crazed animal as his potent chakra began to permeate the air. Riha attempted to move, but her body was immobilized by fear as his raw murderous intent struck her. The Mangekyo Sharingan started to spin quickly in his eye, and Naruto's body started to jog a little faster. The earth rumbled with every stride he took because the chakra he was emitting was so dense that she felt her throat tighten. Naruto was well into a sprint when Riha found the strength to flee. She turned on her heel and ran as fast as her legs could take her, running for dear life as death was close on her heels. Naruto roared and fought off the last effects of the curse seal, and his legs began to blur as he hit full speed. That bitch was unable to flee. He felt his Sharingan pulse and his pupil suddenly felt heavy, almost as if pressure was building up in his eye, as he fixed his gaze on her and willed all his fury at her body to slow down. He wanted to capture her and rip her apart with his bare hands. Time and space started to warp over Riha's body, causing her to feel as though she was being drawn into a vacuum. Naruto felt pressure building inside his eye as the distortion solidified into a black hole. When a nearby tree came into view, Naruto's gaze widened as the black hole followed his line of sight, and the tree began to distort before shattering as it was warped into a void of time and space. He shuddered, feeling as though his eye would fall out of its socket due to the sudden pressure, and his head dropped. If the strain on his sight hadn't been so excruciating, Naruto would have smiled as Riha's astonished eyes saw what had happened to the tree. The betraying blonde put all of her chakra into her legs and accelerated, and Naruto was right behind her, staring at her shape. The black hole slipped into his line of sight as he fixed his stare on her head. He felt the same pressure build up and tried to get it to focus on the blonde, but the pressure brought with it the same heavy feeling, and his gaze plummeted. Riha's arm was twisted out of his socket before she could scream. In response to a sudden stinging pain in his eye, Naruto pushed down the pressure buildup, causing the black hole to vanish. He slowed to a walk as his chakra rapidly dipped and he felt dizzy, needing to lean on a tree for support as his form panted. He held a hand over his Sharingan, attempting to coax the burn, ignoring his discomfort as he glared at the injured woman. Riha had collapsed to the ground in front of him, clutching her now stumped arm. When she heard footsteps, she turned to face Naruto and groaned at the expression in his eye. In a futile attempt to flee, she started to crawl on the ground with just one arm. In front of him, Riha pulled herself up with her remaining arm, leaning heavily on a tree, and held up her one arm in surrender. Naruto took his time, moving slowly forward as he felt his Sharingan stop burning and the familiar minuscule drain return to normal. He removed his hand from his eye, cracking his knuckles. Whatever had happened to his eye just now was draining his chakra like a leech. Naruto, please wait Before she could continue, Naruto raced forward, hitting her so forcefully that her body passed through the tree she was leaning on, destroying many more trees behind her before halting abruptly with a crunch. Riha coughed up blood and looked up at the sandaled feet ahead of her. She couldn't handle the speed. Her body sank into the ground with each hit before Naruto stomped one more time, leaving her buried in the ground. He kicked her so hard that she rolled over and then continued to stomp on her like she had done to Sakura. Naruto allowed her to suffocate for a short while before reaching into the ground, and he watched as her arm flailed madly as she was buried alive. Grabbed by her hair, Riha screamed in agony and spat forth mud and filth as Naruto pulled at her blonde hair cruelly, hauling her up into the air until her feet were off the ground. As Naruto yanked Riha's hair so forcefully that some of it began to break from its roots, the dirty girl kept coughing. Without saying anything, Naruto raised his free hand, and in a matter of seconds, his sword levitated into his ready palm. Riha assumed he would quickly chop off her head, but instead she whimpered as his blade rested horizontally on her side. She met Naruto's blank gaze as he began to literally saw her in half. As Naruto moved his hands back and forth, the sword sliced through the Kevlar of her vest and reached the sensitive skin beneath. Riha screamed as the blade pierced her skin, going deeper and deeper until it reached her collarbone. Blood spurted from the wound, but Naruto persisted in his actions, intending to cut her in half. Hold on. Riha let out a desperate cry while blood spurted from her mouth. Riha screamed once more as she felt her bone being cut and her vision became blurry with tears. Gritting her bloody teeth, she screamed the first thing that came to mind. Naruto didn't even look at her. His entire focus was on cutting her in half, as his eyes never left the movements of his hands. I'm carrying an Uzumaki. The sawing instantly stopped. Blood was pouring from her side like a fountain, and by the way she was held by her hair, her blood dripped to the ground below, quickly forming into a puddle. Naruto left the blade wedged inside of her but jammed the blade into a tree, ignoring the way she screamed again. Pinned against a tree, held up by a blade inches into her side, Riha couldn't contain her sobs. Naruto watched her cry with a sneer forming on his face. He cracked his knuckles before he unleashed some blows that shook her skull. He stopped as her nose gave way and the woman sobbed pitifully. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and uncaring. Look at you. A few minutes ago you couldn't stop smiling and now you're crying like a little girl. What happened to your spunk? Riha coughed out blood before she opened her mouth to speak. Please belly. She was stopped again as Naruto slapped her so hard that the tree saved her head from snapping. Lip busted and bruised, Riha glanced to Naruto's cold eyes. Don't speak. He made a hand seal and suddenly an armored body appeared instantly through a void of time and space, landing on the ground. Fu was still in the same condition Naruto had left him in, with his eyes wide open and unfocused. Riha screamed from her position at the sight of her brother. Naruto slammed his hand on the ground and blitzed through hand seals once more, using the blood on his fingers. Summoning jutsu. His entire ninja hound team appeared in cloud of smoke. The beta male of the group, a sunglass-wearing tanned dog, addressed Naruto with a bow. Yo boss, Akino quipped. He immediately caught the scent of blood and his eyes widened behind his sunglasses as he saw Riha pinned to a tree. The ninja hound saw the sword indented into her side and wordlessly turned to Naruto. He said in an emotionless voice, she killed Pakun. Before Riha's eyes she witnessed the whole group turn feral, no longer the kind-hearted animals she was used to. Naruto had to quickly restrain Bull by his collar as the large dog snapped his jaws inches from Riha's face. Easy. Naruto's firm voice silenced them as he asserted his dominance. Bull stopped his attacks, but Naruto had to pull him firmly to get him to back away from the women. He kneeled beside the large dog, giving him some calming pats before he stood. Glaring at Riha, he pointed to Fu. If you value your brother's life, start talking. As the blood trickled down her body, a white and brown furred pit bull protruded his tongue. Can I eat a leg, boss? Urushi gasped. She's not going away, right? Plus, it's been a long time since I tasted human. At his words, many of the dogs licked their lips unknowingly, causing Riha to shudder. These were the adorable dogs that used to cuddle up next to her. They appeared feral, prepared to rip her to pieces at any time. After giving the pit bull a quick glance, Naruto turned to face Riha. Hear that? My boys are starving. You already know that bitch is on the menu, so let's get started. After biting her lip, Riha gave in and begged pitifully, okay, I'll tell you everything, just please don't hurt Fu. Naruto arched an eyebrow but remained silent. He stroked his chin as he considered her request and looked up at the trees. You're really in no position to make requests, but tell you what. If you behave like a good slut, I'll stop all of this right now. His hounds looked at him bewildered, but he ignored them. Riha nodded tearfully before continuing. One of the village elders approached me not too long ago. She moaned as Naruto willed the sword to pierce her wound more deeply. They wanted to set up a meeting between the Hokage and me. Why would you be of interest to the elderly man? He asked. He has spies en route, she said, gasping before coughing up blood. He heard about Danzo wanting me pregnant, she said, coughing. Naruto's steely gaze met her sad eyes as his eyebrows wrinkled as he began to piece everything together. He muttered, "He wouldn't." In response to his question, she silently nodded in agony. Naruto's expression changed to one of murder before he forced himself to stop thinking so he wouldn't unintentionally kill her. Where does he keep his labs? I don't know, Riha said, shaking her head. I was put to sleep, and the treatment was over when I woke up. With a shake of his head, Naruto said, not good enough. His hounds surrounded Fu's body, drooling with hunger. Naruto, he made me do it. I promise. He threatened both my life and Fu's, she yelled frantically. He is an expert in everything. Regarding Danzu's aspirations to become Hokage, his plans for the civil war, etc. Why would the old man want Danzo dead? Naruto scowled at her. They're partners, aren't they? It didn't make sense. Danzo worked in the dark, while the old man worked in the light. Despite their differences, they both tried to defend Konoha, so why would he want his adversary dead? She muttered in agony, he doesn't want any loose ends. At that, Naruto scowled and moved closer to look at her face. Loose ends? The night of the Kyuubi attack, she said. Danzo saw what Hiruzen did. His pulse pounded against his chest as Naruto wondered if the old man had done anything more than use his deceased sibling. What could he have done that was so important that he wanted even Danzo dead? Tell me. After giving him a long look, Riha turned to face Fu and said, let us go and I'll tell you. Naruto gazed at her, wondering if she was genuinely attempting to reach a compromise with him. I believe you are misinterpreting who you are speaking to, Riha. Your brother and you will both perish. Begging won't make a difference. Bull had the man's head in his jaws before he snapped his jaw shut, making the sound of crunches and cracking bones as he chewed, while Naruto snapped his fingers and his ninja hounds growled before tearing into Fu's body like savages. Riha screamed as his body was torn limb from limb, piece by piece, under powerful jaws until there was nothing left. Naruto gave Riha a strong smack and then grabbed her throat to hold her in place while she screamed like a woman dying and flailed around like she was furious. He grabbed his blade and drove it further into her side while pointing to his face. "Hey, focus right here, sweetheart. Focus on me." He released his sword but not his grip on her throat, when broken blue eyes turned to him. "Good. Tell me now, as I previously stated, now." "You bastard." Riha moaned helplessly after opening her mouth to spit forth blood. "You really did murder him." Before Naruto tightened his hold to quiet her, she continued the mantra, and he fought the need to simply break her neck. "Tell me." He grounded out just inches from crushing her throat. Riha gargled before he relaxed his hold, and she coughed once more before her head fell back. He was going to kill her. He didn't even blink when Fu was ripped apart. She may have tricked him, but he had been concealing things from her as well. This was the real Naruto. The fang in yellow. "Your mother." She groaned. "Shiwasa." Naruto's eyes grew wide as her body froze and locked up. After staring in bewilderment, he used his Sharingan to see into her chakra flow and saw that the curse seal had been activated. When he realized he had completely forgotten about it, he swore. "Fuck," he snarled. He squandered what might have been his sole opportunity to learn the secret details of what transpired that evening because he responded too hastily. She had mentioned his mother. The implications of Danzu's involvement in his father's murder and the Hokage's involvement in his mother's caused Naruto's thoughts to race. He was going to cut out the throats of those filthy old geezers. The woman fell to the ground as he aggressively grabbed his sword and yanked it out. With the exception of her eyes, which were fixed on him, her body was still. Naruto raised a hand to stop his hounds from tearing her to pieces. Naruto gave her a fierce look and said, "I know root agents will be coming for you, so I'm going to leave you alive." Before his hands began to pulse with power and Naruto placed them on top of her head, he flicked between hand seals and said, "I want you to give Danzo a message for me." And severe burn began at Riha's head and spread throughout her body, causing her to groan in agony. The amount of chakra Naruto was pumping through her was so fierce that it burned away the hairs on her head. Seal. Before disappearing, black markings solidified. He dropped to his knees and gazed into her blue, tearful eyes. He stared at her with no pity in his eyes. In their final moments, people show you who they really are. As I glance at you now, I see nothing but a worthless sack of flesh, beaten at her own game, not able to handle the consequences of being caught. Is Danzo training cowards? It doesn't matter, because I saw your life through Fu's memories. You became a whore, lived as whore, and now you will die as whore. Who's pathetic now? Her eyes misted at his words. Ah, is the slut going to cry? Here, let me dry those tears. Riha groaned in pain as her eyelids melted shut and his hands sparkled with lightning. The worst mistake you could have ever made was agreeing to your mission. And you know what the worst thing is? I could have saved you. You were forced as children to join Root. That I can sympathize with, but you personally chose to sleep with people and ruin lives. He sighed. Imagine if you chose differently. Maybe we could have been together. He delicately stroked her flesh and then withdrew his hand, observing the appearance of a mark before it disappeared. The Shinigami will come for your soul. Eternal damnation awaits you. In its stomach you can ponder how stupid enough you were to try and fool me. He groaned as he rose to his full height before turning on his heel. Before he hesitated, he took a step. Oh, almost forgot. As his blade expanded and pierced Riha's pelvis, all she could do was groan in pain. Naruto sheathed the blade, willing it to return to its original length. Without even looking at her, he willed his hounds to disperse, vanishing in a flash and racing back to his team. When Naruto first arrived at his team, he went straight to Konohamaru. Naruto was unsure if the Kyuubi's chakra could repair the piercing to his heart. He stopped in front of the youngster and looked over him, noticing that his shirt was covered in blood. He scowled at what he saw when he raised his shirt. The injury was healed. However, he saw no heartbeat when he looked into his chakra flow. He was not breathing at all. As he rubbed his hands together, Naruto's hands sparked with lightning due to the friction. He placed them over Konohamaru's chest, directly over his heart, and willed his chakra to provide an electrical charge, satisfied that he had given them a substantial charge. Although Konohamaru's body jolted, there was no sign of resuscitation. Naruto swore. Fuck, come on Ko. He rubbed his hands together once more, igniting them with further chakra, and then he did it again. As Konomaru was being revived, his body shook and the genin coughed dryly. At least he was breathing again, even though he was still unconscious. With a breath of relief, Naruto looked at his pounding heart before pulling his shirt back down. He looked at Sasuke, who was unconscious and had a hand over his eyes and stomach. When Naruto peered into his chakra flow, he saw a flash of quickly pulsing chakra behind his eyes. The flickering behind Sasuke's eyes ceased when Naruto placed a hand against his head and directed his chakra into his mind. He scowled at the injured skin as he carefully raised his shirt. Ribs that cracked. He frowned as he thought. It wasn't as horrible as he had anticipated. He looked at Sakura after setting his shirt back down. Sakura saw Naruto's flickering form reappear. Seeing the damage already, he scowled down at her. She was still breathing, but she was unconscious. However, her breathing was weak and shallow. He knelt in front of her, covered her tummy with his palm, and passed his chakra through her. Internal bleeding, serious blunt force trauma, burst liver, weak heartbeat, broken ribsaw. He trailed off, not willing to mention the rest. He willed his rage to subside as he closed his eyes. Calmly, he reached into one of his vest pockets and took out a red signal flare. He directed it upward and allowed his chakra to pass through it, causing a bright red ball to shoot into the air. One of Konoha's rapid response squads quickly surrounded him after he sensed swiftly approaching chakra signatures. In an instant, a familiar cat-masked Anbu appeared before him. As soon as she yelled, "Oh my Kami-e Naruto-kun, what happy a medic now," 2 medics appeared. It's true that Naruto looked terrible. He had circles under his eyes and was smeared in blood. Despite having a low chakra, he remained essentially uninjured. "I don't need medical attention," he snarled. "My students do." The medics nodded before moving on to Sakura, running glowing green hands over her form. The other one moved to the boys doing the same. Naruto watched them work in silence before his eyes widened and Yugo watched in confusion as he disappeared. In the blink of an eye he appeared again carrying something bloody in his hands. Naruto held Pakun carefully in his arms. "I need another medic now." Yugo removed her mask at the sight and held a hand over her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. Who could have carried out this action? Another masked Anbu appeared before them and carefully took the small body from his hands and gently placed him on the ground. Naruto watched as his hands glowed green with rising anxiety. The agent scowled under his mask. An extremely weak pulse, but he's still alive. Naruto sagged in relief. His eyes burned with tears and he felt his head get light before his eyes closed. Yugo could only open her arms to catch his body as exhaustion finally caught up with him and Naruto welcomed the darkness. Naruto dreamed of Konoha on fire that night. Black flames were devouring everything that stood in their way. As buildings fell due to the extreme heat, dead bodies were scattered over the streets. Despite the overpowering stench of death, Naruto continued to move ahead. There were more bodies the farther he went. Naruto looked around at the devastation, wondering what or who could have destroyed the nation's most powerful hamlet to such an extent. He was surrounded by dead people, both shinobi and civilians, with fragments of their bodies scattered throughout rubble. The sight of the village elders caused him to halt for a while. Despite having bruises and blood on their bodies, they were still alive. They were bound together on a single, upright wooden pole that was visible to everyone. He was drawn to the dark flames that were slowly making their way up the wood. Before long, it had reached them, and as they were burned alive, their cries could be heard throughout the night. Naruto saw Homura and Kaharu cry as the black flames devoured the flesh of their nude bodies. He gazed at them, then resumed his stroll. Despite his desire to assist them, he is unable to do so for whatever reason. The more he went into the community, the more dead and devastation he saw. He did stop this time when he saw something that almost made him throw up. Danzo was fastened to the wall. His body parts were pinned to a wall, to be more precise. His head, torso, legs, and arms were all severed from one another and stabbed through the wall by a kunai. The way his body parts were arranged to spell a single word was what caused him to freeze, not the cruelty of it. Root. As the wooding rod fell from the black flames, Homura and Kaharu's cries finally ended, and Naruto looked back the direction he had come after staring at the dead guy. He looked forward as he noticed an explosion. Ignoring the blood on his sandals, Naruto launched himself into a sprint, running as fast as his legs would allow. He stopped in front of the Hokage Tower. As the Hokage Tower burnt, black flames illuminated the melting red, coating the emblem of fire in an angry crimson. He looked up at the balcony where fighting could be heard. Before he saw the third Hokage's form being hurled off the structure and plummeting to the ground below, He heard cries and shouting. Black flames danced along his body, dissolving his black armor. The man, still alive, lay helplessly on the ground. He paused and looked up, meeting Naruto's startled gaze. He shivered as his shape was engulfed by the flames, and then his head fell lifeless. He noticed movement and turned to look back at the balcony, where he saw a figure appear at the top. But all he could see from the pitch-black night was the figure's vivid crimson cloak. The unidentified man, whose cloak billowed behind him and danced in the wind, let out a savage yell of victory so loud that Naruto had to shield his ears as the village's disintegrating foundations trembled. After taking his hands off, Naruto looked up at the figure. Equally red clouds obscured the crimson moon in the sky. The tower was illuminated by the red light as the clouds appeared to flee from the sound of his roar. When Naruto saw the figure, his eyes were wide. He was gazed down at by a spinning Sharingan. Naruto was astounded by what he saw. This was what he had done. However, how could he harm the village in this way? Why would he harm the village in this way? His questions were halted as the ground shook and behind the burning Hokage tower emerged the Kyuubi, its 9 tails swaying hypnotically behind it. Naruto gave a gulp. The Kyuubi? How could it be free? Konohamaru was where? By the fires of the tower its wide grin looked like the face of death. When the Kyuubi lowered its head toward the shrouded Naruto, he got frightened and was certain that his other self would be devoured. However, as the shrouded Naruto sprang atop the Kyuubi's head and then rose to his full height atop the beast, his eyes grew wide. Naruto could do nothing but stare as man and beast stared down at him from the raging black fires of the tower, the red light of the moon illuminating their forms. If there was ever a perfect picture of death, then he was staring at it right now. The other Naruto wordlessly reached behind him and pulled out something white. He threw the thing down, and as it drifted softly in his direction, Naruto retrieved it. Before turning back to his other persona, he gazed at the Hokage's cap. When the hooded Naruto began to flash through hand seals and completed clasping his hands together, he became aware. A shiver ran down Naruto's spine. His eyes grew wide as something materialized in front of the two, and he had to back away in terror as it solidified. A massive, translucent, gaunt apparition with a demonic face materialized in a whirlwind of light, appearing ethereal and unworldly. The Shinigami looked down at Naruto, who retreated a step. When it opened its mouth, rows of pointed teeth were visible, and a long, serpentine tongue ran down its lips. Without saying anything, the death god turned to face the shrouded Naruto and pointed to the destroyed hamlet. Naruto froze at what he said next. Enjoy. Naruto quickly woke up and stood up. Give a thump. Kurenai hissed, holding her head in pain as she stumbled backwards, letting out a string of curses. Naruto nursed the bump on his head, scowling in pain before he opened his eyes and glanced around him. Kakashi's entire age generation stared back at him. Naruto gave a blink. Lazily, he raised a hand. He stammered, yo. Kurenai collected herself and nursed her bruised forehead while sneering at him. Geez, why am I always getting attacked around you? Her flaming eyes turned to them, and a few laughs were audible before they were cut off. She glanced back at Naruto with a menacing glare. You were moaning in your sleep and sweating. I came to try and wake you, and you, she said, frowning as they both recalled how he had responded to her attempt to wake him in Black River, only to be met with a headbutt this time. Naruto grinned at her flushed face. He really said, sorry Kurenai-chan. She scowled, but her red cheeks betrayed her expression as she waved off his apology. Composing herself, she ran a hand through her hair before clearing her throat. So, she started. Mind explaining what caused Team 7, plus Pakun, such serious injuries and caused you of all people to suffer from chakra exhaustion? This disbelief in her voice was evident with her last few words. When the Yugo had rounded up everyone and told them that Naruto had been checked into Konoha's general hospital for chakra exhaustion, everyone had laughed for a good 5 minutes. They instantly sobered up when Yugo didn't even flinch. Seeing she was completely serious, they quickly made their way to the hospital. Despite their best efforts to be inconspicuous, the gossipers started talking when they saw so many well-known Junin traveling to the hospital. The most powerful shinobi in Konoha was hurt, and word immediately traveled throughout the village that the Yellow Fang had sustained some minor injuries. Kurenai fought the impulse to roll her eyes. Everyone always overreacted for no apparent reason. They were merely concerned that anything may weary the strongest shinobi in the hamlet. Their concern wasn't even genuine. It required a village proclamation that Naruto was okay for things to settle down because rumors were circulating and people were going crazy. They were all wondering what or who had worn Naruto out to the point that he required treatment for chakra depletion. Naruto simply looked around, trying to find 3 young faces. "Where's my genin?" he asked sharply. With a sigh, Kurenai approached him and took a seat on his hospital bed. Glancing at her, Naruto could see she was in her civvies, filling out a lovely red dress that accentuated her form with an opened ivory midriff cardigan. With the exception of a few uniforms, most people were dressed in civvies when I looked around. When Naruto looked down, he saw that he was wearing his well-known black face mask tank top. He felt he was wearing pants underneath his covers. The focal point of focus was the necklace worn by the first Hokage. Ignoring that, Kurenai stretched forward, smoothing his sleek blonde hair. She looked closely at him, satisfied that they were respectable. "No need to worry, your kids are fine. Sakura was in the worst condition, but the doctors say she'll only need a few weeks to recover." She put a hand over his mouth, seeing he was about to speak. "Pakun is fine. He's at the vet with Hana taking care of him." She removed her hand, momentarily smiling when Naruto sagged with relief. She stopped smiling and crossed her arms in a serious manner. "Now, mind telling us what happened?" The phrase, personal space, was abruptly forgotten, and many eyes were fixed on him. The faces were captured by Naruto's Sharingan. Guy, Asuma, Kurenai, Anko, Genma, Yugo, Hayate, Aoba, Raida, Genma, Ebisu, Katetsu and Azumo, Tenzo, a few unknown faces, and was that a Ibiki? Naruto gazed dumbly at the tall figure in the rear. "Yo teacher." Ibiki just grinned unknowingly, causing Naruto's spine to tingle. That man ought never to grin. Ever. He nervously ran a hand through his hair. Damn. The whole gang was all here. Everyone had assembled because they heard he was injured. Naruto's cheeks turned hot beneath his mask because he wasn't used to being the center of attention. Anko stared at him before she squealed. "Oh look everybody, Naru-chan is blushing." She suddenly tugged at his masked cheeks. "Kawaii. Naruto-chan, if you weren't injured I would just jump in that bad and raw eh?" Kurenai slapped a hand over her mouth and pushed Anko back with a scowl. Rubbing at his cheeks, Naruto let a smile come under his mask before his face became blank. "Naruto-kun." All eyes turned to Yugo. "Sorry to interrupt, but neither me or my squad found any traces of Riha. Wasn't she with you?" she inquired. At the mention of her name, Naruto's eyes narrowed and everyone became tense at his expression. "Did something happen to Riha-chan, my rival?" Guy questioned. For a brief period, Naruto looked out the window to see Konoha's lights glitter in the darkness. At night, the village appeared stunning. He let out a sigh and looked back at the gathering. Riha was responsible for this. Everyone was startled right away, and inquiries were made quickly. "What? Riha-chan did this? The babe, she wouldn't hurt a fly." Everyone stopped as they were hit with killing intent. Naruto's form briefly glowed with a blue outline and his chakra began to rapidly spike, causing those close to him to step back as lighting crackled around his form. Kurenai remained where she was and laid a calming hand on his leg, meeting his furious eyes unflinchingly. Naruto's gaze softened and his chakra levels lowered. Everyone in the room let out a breath as the suffocating pressure that had been in the air dissipated. Exhaling deeply, Naruto took a calming breath as he lowered his head. "She did this. She nearly killed my students and Pakun." Yugo immediately walked outside, and the guards at the door stood at attention. The guards saluted, and Yugo returned to the chamber as the doors were sealed behind her. "If anyone approaches there to be terminated with extreme prejudice. I want these doors sealed shut with soundproof seals." With his long bangs casting a shadow over his face, Naruto kept his head down. Everyone startled when they heard, "She was a root spy, a seductress sent by Danzo to get impregnated by me. She was a spy, that lovely woman." Yugo's eyes were wide open when she let out a loud curse, shocking everyone. Her heartbroken eyes went to Naruto and she said, "That slut? I knew her name sounded familiar. Kami. Naruto-kun, I'm so sorry. I could have done something." She trailed off as tears streamed down her cheeks. Hayate put an arm around her and comforted her by murmuring in her ears. Naruto looked up at Yugo. "It's not your fault. She had everyone fooled. Not even my dogs sensed any bad intentions from her until it was too late." Everyone stared in the face. It was serious for a spy to dupe everyone for so long. Everyone exchanged a silent message as their eyes locked. What's to say they weren't being spied on if Naruto was? Now, in this village, who could they trust? Asuma asked, "Why does Danzo want your jeans?" He fought the want to take out a cigarette in an attempt to relax. Before running a hand through his hair, Naruto appeared to sag at the question. If he told Asuma that his father was to blame for everything, he wasn't sure how he would respond. He looked at every person in the room and said, I don't know if you all can handle what I'm about to tell you. You're all loyal to Konoha and serve the Hokage. I wouldn't want you to feel conflicted because we're friends. Your lives could be in great danger, and if I was responsible, he sighed. You could all be killed. I couldn't allow you all to take this risk. Asuma gave his beard a scratch. The tall man then smiled and said, So I'm guessing the rumors of beef between you and the old man are true, eh? Well, I hope you hit him as hard as they say you did. Asuma shrugged as everyone in the room turned to stare at him. What? Naruto gave a headshake. Listen, I know you all made time out of your busy schedules to visit me, and I'm touched, but I think you all should leave. I could never ask any of you to be involved with what I have planned. For a bastard like me, you shouldn't suffer, Naruto grasped his head in agony. Kurenai frowned and withdrew her hand beside him. Naruto, I don't think you understand how much we care. He saw nothing but total seriousness when he gazed into her crimson eyes. He slowly shook his head at her disbelief. Before he could speak, Asuma interrupted. I said it before, and I'll say it again, Naruto. You're more of a Hokage than the old man could ever be. I can't speak for everyone here, but I can say for myself that I was never loyal to this village. That's why I briefly joined the 12 Ninja Guardians. My loyalty lies with my comrades. If there's someone I look up to, that person would be you, Hokage-sama. He smiled. Naruto shook his head in frustration. He stopped off, muttering to himself, You don't understand and none of you understand. If you only knew. Kurenai fought the want to give him a hard blow to the head. Why did Naruto have such a thick head? She began placing a hand on his leg and said, Naruto-kun. Staring into his eyes, she said, You can trust us. Please don't push us away. Naruto gave her a quick look before grunting in agreement. Without saying anything, Naruto motioned for her to approach. She moved closer, placing a hand on top of his head and displaying a hand seal since she knew what he intended to do. Her genjutsu skills caused the entire room to change and warp. The shinobi in the room immediately saw Naruto's memories after allowing Kurenai's chakra to enter their brains. Please don't start a riot when this is finished. His memories were shown to them as if they were in the front row of a movie theater, and his voice sounded disembodied from all around them. He began by showing them what had happened. What had transpired with Konohamaru at Black River, the disclosure of the Hokage's sinister secrets, the root agent pursuing him, and ultimately what transpired with Riha. When his memories finished, the genjutsu ended and everyone found themselves back in the hospital room. Mouths were open and eyes were wide. Even Enko had to take a seat to gather herself after Yugo started crying. Ibiki maintained his expression, but there was a menacing glint in his eyes. Guy's eyes were on the verge of overflowing. He yelled, Hoa, how could the Hokage do this? Such vile acts are unforgivable, while standing with a murderous expression on his face. The worst was Asuma, who began clenching his teeth as if he were about to commit murder. That son of a bitch. He's gone too far, he exclaimed, standing like Guy. What are you planning, Naruto? I want in, he insisted. Kurenai swallowed hard and blinked away her menacing tears as she controlled herself. She turned to face Naruto, who was silently observing them all before the blonde gave a slow shake of his head. See, this is what I meant. I can't in good consciousness ask any of you to get involved. Today was the last straw. I'm doing this alone. He murmured. He growled, and Guy's eyes narrowed. Then what, Naruto? If you succeed, you'll be hunted to the ends of the earth, he yelled. I can't. I won't lose my best friend. My rival. He finally started crying as he recalled the day Kakashi passed away. If he lost Naruto, he would be damned. Aoba supported him by placing a soothing hand on his shoulder. Naruto gave a headshake. The woman tightened her fist and said, I'm sorry, but I won't allow Iak. Damn it, Kurenai, stop hitting me. Before lowering her arm. Naruto was a fool. Forget about his stubbornness. Ignoring his hiss, she grabbed him firmly by his long bangs. Listen here, Baka. We've all known you since the day Kakashi introduced that small little boy to us 12 years ago. We've watched that young boy grow before our eyes into a man, becoming the most powerful shinobi to ever grace this village. But despite all your power, all your reputation, we had to watch you suffer. And it kills me to know that you held us all back at arm's length is suffering in silence. She stared at him. No more, Naruto. We're going to stand beside you whether you like or not. If you want to be stubborn, then I'm just going to have force you into submission, and trust me, you wouldn't want that. He flashed him a threatening look. She released her hold and Naruto gazed at her, then scowled once more at his hair. When they were good, She lowered her hand after stretching forward once more and smoothing them out. It was starting to become a habit. After giving her a quick glance, Naruto looked around at determined faces. He swallowed hard, his barriers refusing to come down as he felt a surge of emotions in the pit of his stomach. He didn't think he could trust anyone again after Riha. Kurenai said, "She hurt you, didn't she?" She looked at his tight body for a moment before reaching forward and entwining their fingers. She said earnestly, "Naruto, we won't ever hurt you. We're your friends, so trust us." Naruto was not going to back down. "I do trust you all, honestly I do. But Riha just proved that you loved her." Naruto froze, gazing into Kurenai's sad eyes with wide eyes, and she took advantage of that. Because of her genjutsu, she had experienced everything he was, even though he controlled what they saw. His anguish, pain, and most importantly, his shattered heart. Don't allow what she did make you lose your faith in people, Naruto. If you can no longer place your trust in Konoha, place your trust in us. The people who love you. She gently grasped his hand. Her eyes were misting, and she was virtually pleading, "Please." Naruto's eyes began to well up with tears as his menacing feelings erupted. Naruto. He met Genma's eyes upon hearing his name. The Hokage guard platoon that had served his father, Raida and Iwashi, were standing next to him. "If there was one man I and my colleagues respected more than anything, it was your father. Before his death he tasked us to protect what was more precious to him than anything in this world." He let out a sigh. "By your life, I failed him, and we all failed him. I couldn't fulfill the request that my dead Hokage gave me, but I can start now. Please, I beg you, don't deny us the honor to protect and serve the son of the man I loved like a father," Naruto said, staring in disbelief as the three knelt before him. Naruto was at a loss for words. "Ji Genma." He trailed off while Guy gave him a salute and then knelt. Asuma pretended to bow to him and then knelt down too. Anko even knelt down and smiled at his face. He gasped as each person slowly dropped on their knees in front of him. He felt those stinging tears finally begin to fall as he gazed at their bent heads. Why? Why did they all have such intense devotion to him? How could he have earned such devotion? Guy gave him a radiant smile. He said without hesitation, "My eternal rival, I'll follow you to the ends of the earth." With a lit cigarette in his mouth, Asuma was smiling at him. "You already know where my loyalty lies." Faces nod in accord. "By you word, Naruto, Naruto-senpai, Naruto-sama." Tenzo smiled. At the term, everyone nodded. They all chanted, "Naruto-sama." When Naruto heard their pledge of allegiance to him, he finally started crying. He never would have imagined that the people he had come to call friends would be so committed. Kurenai gave him a gentle grin from where she sat and then pulled him into a warm embrace by pulling on his hand. She gently ran her hand through his blonde hair, lowered his head to his shoulder, and whispered comfortingly into his ear. She recalled what Riha had said to Naruto as he sobbed. The Junin was severely wounded by those comments, which cut deeper than a knife, even if he didn't show it. He was never alone, though. He simply had trouble expressing his feelings. He had become alien to social interaction due to his self-isolation. She encircled his trembling body with her arms more tightly. How heartbreaking it must have been to be betrayed by the one person he believed he could trust. She felt that the manner he had treated her wasn't harsh enough. "Bitch," she thought to herself. She gently kissed the top of his head and rubbed little circles into his back, saying, "I hope you burn in hell." Ibiki, who was not one to socialize or display emotion, had been silent the entire time. He preferred to observe from a distance as everyone gathered around Naruto, offering consoling murmurs. He watched him find solace in his peers' love and nodded proudly. He was always aware of the boy's uniqueness. Konoha was completely corrupt. For years, he had personally witnessed the shadows that had cast a shadow on it. These elders have long since outlived their usefulness, engaging in extramarital affairs and scheming behind the military's back. A change was long overdue. A new Konoha, free from the deceit and sentiments of the Will of Fire, a false doctrine that had killed the majority of Konoha's diligent shinobi. The idea made him shake his head. To put out these dominating flames, Naruto would be the shifting breeze. With all the power of an unstoppable cyclone, the revolution would bring about change. He was certain that the elder's time was running out. The idea made him smile. He prayed that this youngster would remember the person who taught him everything when he rose to the position of Hokage. Danzo looked down at his lifeless agent, crippled by the curse seal he had applied to her, her body battered and shattered. Her body was covered in blood, with one arm missing and several cuts and apparent fractures. Her eyes were melted shut as well. She was still alive, Nevertheless, in spite of everything, silently, he turned to a few of the nearby soldiers and motioned for them to carry the girl. Clearly, she had failed. All he could do was be grateful that his curse seal had been activated before she could reveal any of his secrets. She started to wake up as the root agents reached out to touch her. She moaned in warning as her head twitched, but it was too late. Black marks emerged on her body as soon as one of the agents touched her. Danzo gasped as an inky black material started to spray the area and 4 symbols solidified on her form before emerging from her body and branching out in a broad arc. Get back. Don't allow any of that substance to touch you. It was too late. As the seals extended into the air, agents in the surrounding area had the black stuff land on their form. A massive back spear grew beneath the seals before it collapsed on itself, trapping everyone and everything inside the woman's body before they could flee. Danzo and a few agents had narrowly escaped by jumping back in time. He hadn't had to move so quickly in a long time, so his breathing was labored. The area was permanently damaged by the formation of a sizable crater. Danzo scowled at the idea of falling for a trap and almost dying. It was even more difficult for him to apply a reverse 4 symbols seal to a living individual. An unpleasant frown appeared. Oh my, that boy. Tightly, he murmured, retrieve her body. As he turned to limp away, one of his operatives softly shouted his name. Danzo turned and scowled at the agent. What? The crater was indicated by the agent. My lord, you need to see this. He hobbled closer, his brow wrinkled, and looked into the crater without saying anything. What he saw caused his lone eye to enlarge. Riha was still alive. However, she was moaning in excruciating pain. The woman was groaning loudly and covering her stomach with one arm, indicating that whatever she was going through had rendered his curse seal ineffective. This shouldn't be feasible. She should have been dead for all intents and purposes, but he had never witnessed the seal being activated on a living person. Her tummy started to shift and twist as she let out a scream of pain. Her body trembled, and her form began to quickly enlarge. Before Danzo could shield his face, the woman erupted, spilling intestines and blood all over the place. He wiped his face with his robe before freezing at what he saw. There were bits of meat and bone all over the place. Not far from the crater, what appeared to be a fragment of her head had fallen. Her final moments must have been excruciating, and it was an absolutely repulsive sight. However, it was the gory message inscribed on the ground that had drawn his attention. Next up is you. Danzo gave a scowl and started to shuffle off. Destroy an evidence of this ever taking place. I want nothing left. The third Hokage was using his crystal ball to observe what was happening inside Konohagakure's Hokage tower. When the seal he had put on his double agent started to pulse, warning him that her life was in jeopardy, he became concerned. He never would have imagined that she would be found so quickly. His schemes had gone horribly wrong. He sighed as he saw Danzo leave the blood-written message. Naruto would not be coming for him anytime soon. He looked at his guards. Make haste and get the elders. The guards paused. My lord? Hiruzen merely sighed. Do as I ask. The Hokage picked up his pipe as the guards bowed and vanished. The pipe was lighted with a fire chakra concentration. Hiruzen exhaled heavily and leaned back in his chair as he took heavy puffs. He didn't have to wait long when his 2 teammates, who appeared to be very angry, entered his office. Kaharu was the first to voice her disapproval, as usual. What is the meaning of this, Hiruzen? To summon us at such an hour, eh? He pointed to the chairs in front of his desk and muttered, shut up and sit down. Both scowled and complied with the request. Hiruzen continued to recline in his chair and take a few puffs before turning around and moving to his office windows to observe Konoha's nighttime splendor. The 2 elders exchanged a look, and then Homura cleared his throat. Hiruzen, why have we been a? Hiruzen interjected, Konoha is beautiful at night, is it not? They shook their heads and looked at his back in bewilderment. What was this old ape talking about? Kaharu looked warily at Hiruzen as she sat up in her chair. Yes, it is, but Konoha's beauty is of no importance right now. What is important is the Rei. He interrupted once more, saying, in your final moments, you start to appreciate the things that you have. It's the little things, the subtleties that you never really think twice about, that start to stand out, wouldn't you agree? The direction of this discourse was unknown to both elders. Kaharu scowled at his back, annoyed up with him dodging their inquiries. What on earth is going on, Hiruzen? He asked, groaning as he puffed on his pipe several times before turning to face them. Naruto will soon come for us. The shocking statement caused both of their eyes to widen. Fearfully, Kaharu said, How does he know? She almost collapsed with relief when Hiruzen shook his head. However, Their former teammates continued to moan as he sat in his chair. But I fear you will soon find out. Homura clenched his jaw. You see now why you should have just killed him, Hiruzen. But no, you were too soft, too weak, not having the guts to do what was necessary, and now he has grown strong, a threat to us all. Kaharu urged him to settle down. She gasped as Homura turned to face her angrily. Homura, please be calm. Hiruzen is the Hokage, surely he can't. Are you a fool? Have you felt that boy's chakra? I've only felt such ominous and potent chakra in one man, and that had been when Mito-sama was trying to control the beast sealed inside of her. Kaharu gave a gulp. Surely you must be overestimating him, she exclaimed fearfully. She had heard rumors, but she had written them off as hero worship. Rumors. Homura would have given her a face slap. He yelled with frustration, has old age dulled your mind, Kaharu? He killed a Jinchuriki by himself when he was only 16. 16, he shouted, and he shows more skill using the same chains as Mito and Kushina to control and suppress the chakra of a tailed beast. Who else do you know could accomplish such a feat? He shouted, grasping her by the shoulders. Homura. Homura let go of the Hokage's hand and reclined in his chair as he heard the warning tone in his voice. Hiruzen looked at a trembling Kaharu after observing the man gather himself. Homura simply shook his head in defeat as Kaharu gasped, I fear Homura is right. Naruto is powerful, very powerful. And now that he has the Mangekyo Sharingan, I don't even think in my prime I would be able to match him. He groaned and said, it's hopeless, we're all doomed. Ignoring him, Hiruzen preferred to simply savor the brief tranquility while it lasted, smoking on his pipe and letting the calming tobacco release the strain in his muscles. Kaharu appeared on the verge of tears. What will we do, Hiruzen? If Naruto was too strong for even Hiruzen, then there was no hope. He would murder them all. Homura remained silent, concentrating on fleeing the town and making his way to the city to seek refuge in the Fire Lord's court. They heard him mumble, Konoha. He clarified after observing their perplexity. Despite Naruto's strength, he cannot stand against the military might of 17,000 shinobi. I would have to be discreet, recalling our shinobi from across the continent. Homura's eyes went serious. What are you implying? Words like those had grave consequences. Hiruzen looked at him blankly. You can already guess, my old friend. After hearing enough, Kaharu let out a shriek. This is madness, Hiruzen. Konoha would be weakened, defenseless, and our enemies wouldn't just stand by and watch. She began to stammer and her body trembled with a mixture of anger and dread. Why, you see what you have caused. If you had just left. Hiruzen struck his desk with his fist, breaking it. His crystal ball broke into fragments as it dropped to the ground. I did what I thought was best. Konoha was weakened and we needed all the help we could get. Before the tears began to fall, her lip trembled. Not that, you fool. Why did you have to kill her? Why? Now we're suffering for the actions you have caused. He swore revenge, and now he will soon have it. She sobbed and buried her head in her hands. Hiruzen winced, then stopped talking. He turned his chair to cover his embarrassed expression and murmured, I had no choice. He heard Homura carry the sobbing woman out of his office, her whimpers diminishing, and he was left in silence as the seats cleared. I had no choice. With a sigh, Hiruzen removed his hat and went to the window to gaze out at the hamlet. The greater welfare of Konoha was the reason behind everything he had done. He was charged as Hokage with keeping this town safe and resilient, and he would be damned if a crack. Before turning to face the portrait that had fallen from the wall, Hiruzen sprung and walked around his desk. He gazed at it for a few seconds before stooping to retrieve it. His eyes grew wide as he turned it over. He was met with a glare from Minato Namikaze. Hiruzen's expression changed to one of horror before he let go of the image and shuddered away from it. He yelled, "And no, leave me alone. Leave me alone," to the vacant office. Since then, these omens had followed him everywhere he went. He had sensed that someone was observing him, their eyes tracking every step he took. He had experienced sleepless nights and was shouting at an imaginary object out of paranoia. That man tormented him even after he passed away. I curse you. This will cost you money. I swear it before I die, you're going to pay. In agony, Hiruzen clutched his head. Stay terrified because the Shinigami's stomach is ravenous for your soul. He staggered backward, supporting himself on the windows of his office. His head pounded as if it were being crushed, and a sharp shiver ran up his spine. Run. Stay hidden. Hide behind the walls you mistakenly think will keep you safe. His gaze landed on the Hokage Tower as he experienced the similar feeling of being watched. The endless gaze of the fourth Hokage's stone eyes seemed to immobilize him. Naruto is going to pursue you. Hiruzen let out a cry and bolted from his office. He needed to avoid those eyes. His sleep was disturbed by the same icy blue eyes. As though he had been reborn to exact revenge, he saw the identical eyes in his kid. I'll be waiting, too. A graveyard of old deceased creatures was found in a densely forested location in the hilly regions to the north of the territory between Takigakure and Otogakure. All that was left of them were enormous fossils that protruded from the ground and were as big as the mountains. Thick tunnels concealed deep beneath offered the ideal source of anti-detection, preventing any chakra-detecting methods from learning about the underground operations. A lone guy was sitting in front of a huge wall covered in glass containers in one section of this covert location, which was a sizable laboratory. The Uchiha clan's emblem, which the seated figure proudly carried on his back, was displayed above the enormous wall. He cocked his head to carefully observe the Sharingan eyeballs, each suspended in fluids floating in transparent glass containers, behind the lone eyehole of his orange mask. Eurlatia, an insectivorous plant-like shell steadily formed out of the earth as the ground abruptly twisted and moved, seemingly speaking to no one. A double-colored face opened like a Venus flytrap and looked at the masked person sitting comfortably in his chair. "Apologies," he said with yellow-like eyes staring down at him. "We stopped to feed on the way." Two voices, one dark and malevolent and the other slightly gentle and distinctly masculine, spoke in unison, almost matching the white and black hues of his face. The man in the mask scoffed and turned to give the plant a humanoid scowl. After a few moments of stillness, he asked, "Well?" His short green hair and the same mixed skin, which was equally divided down the length of his body, were shown as the shell opened. The black side said, "His hatred for the village grows." The white side laughed and said, "Hiruzen played his part perfectly." The man gave a nod of approval. He crossed his arms and said, "Continue, Zetsu." The white Zetsu said, I've never felt such chakra." In an attempt to elicit a response from the man, Black Zetsu concluded, "It was an interesting fight. Such dense and potent chakra. Even more sinister than your own." The now identified Toby hummed to himself. He would want to witness the results of his hard work for himself. "I hope you recorded all of it. Observe the boy's growth. He would need a replacement because Itachi was starting to cause him problems." A sly smirk appeared on his face as he watched Zetsu describe what had happened. Indeed, everything was proceeding as planned. Soon the boy would find out the dark secrets that the elders tried to keep hidden for so long. He would kill them, that was obvious. If things went smoothly, then he would destroy Konoha in the process. Yesa Itachi would die and Naruto would take his place. As he watched the Mangekyo Sharingan activate in his eyes, he smiled. He laughed menacingly and said, "Yes, Naruto, show them your power. Then when you destroy Tama, come to me." After a week, wasn't that such a good movie? Naruto nodded slowly, fighting the impulse to nod off because he didn't want to argue with her. They had just watched a geisha film about a young girl whose family sold her into the trade. It told the tale of her life in a way that was nearly sad and devastating. Naruto was hardly focusing. He looked at his beautiful fellow blonde, who was blowing her nose with a tissue, and rolled his eyes. They had just finished the awful film and were cuddled up on the couch in his condominium's living room. Looking at him inquisitively, Riha replied, "So what did you like about it?" After rubbing his head in response to the query, Naruto shrugged. In the hopes that it would be sufficient to persuade her to quit bugging him, he said, "I don't know, I guess I liked the setting." He let out a sigh as she began to talk about how lovely and romantic it was. He started to ignore her when she didn't stop. With his eyes closed, he nodded absently to everything she said. "I mean, I can relate to the main character. And that ending. After 20 years she got her man." Naruto nodded once more, almost falling asleep before he abruptly stopped. Had he heard her correctly? He said abruptly, "What did you say?" And Riha stopped her enthusiastic talking. She gave him a questioning look and then repeated what she had just said. Naruto shook his head at her as he sat up on the couch. "Noah, what you said before that." Riha cocked an inquisitive head. She nervously repeated, "I can relate to the main character." Naruto gave her a slow nod. He moved to look directly at her, giving her his whole attention. "What do you mean by that?" Riha shrugged, and Naruto saw that she had abruptly stopped looking at him. "Dunno. Guess I can just feel for her story of being taken away from family at young age and brought into a life she never wanted. She had no desire to serve, to carry out her actions. Ultimately, it was always reduced to a mission." Naruto gave her a raised eyebrow. "So," he said, attempting to decipher her words' deeper meaning, "you were a geisha?" Feminine rage blazed in Riha's eyes. What? Naruto had to recoil to avoid the blow to his face. Do I look like an entertainer to you, Naruto? She asked rhetorically as she leapt on top of him, effectively pinning him by straddling his waist. Naruto smiled despite the predicament as soft hands tightened their grasp on his throat. He adored the way her mouth twisted when she became irate. Well, you can dance. And you play the samisen really well. Your singing is horrible though. And the way you're so good in the bedroom, one would think that you were a professional. He laughed. Her eyes truly became enraged, which was his only warning. Her fist struck his cheek, causing his head to turn abruptly. He stared at her in disbelief, perplexed by her weeping face, as she slid away from him and made her way to the master bedroom. The door slammed so loudly that it shook the complex. Rubbing his sore cheek, Naruto sat up on the couch. He stared in bewilderment at the direction she had stormed off, wondering why she had become so agitated. He followed her journey from the couch and came to the entrance of the master bedroom. Riha-chan. He tapped the door gently. May I come in? He said, knowing that if she didn't respond, he should have simply left and given her some space to calm down. Rather, he silently closed the door behind him after carefully opening it and entering the room. When he saw her sobbing on the pillows, he stopped. He approached her and sat softly on his bed, silently observing her. He disregarded her stiffening as he reached down and placed a hand on her shoulder. What's wrong? He whispered. She sniffed, then turned to face him, her eyes swollen and red. Havia, have you ever wanted to tell someone something so badly, but can't? I mean literally can't. Naruto's brows furrowed down at her. What was the topic of this? He curled up next to her and put his arm over her waist, pressing her to him. I'm a horrible person, Naruto-kun. Naruto quietly muffled her whimpers. As he dried her tears, he muttered, we're all horrible people. He said, it's how you choose to live your life that defines who you are. Horrible or not. His words had a profound effect on her, and as she leaned her head on his chest, she started crying again. Her body shook with sobs as she cries grew in volume. She couldn't take it anymore. It was I love you. She froze against him in an instant. She saw him grinning down at her as she slowly tilted her head to look up into his face. His smile grew as he removed his mask, revealing a complete row of teeth to her. She was eventually broken by the hand that slowly started caressing her cheek. Their tongues battled for supremacy as she surged for his face, their lips smashing into a scorching kiss. Before she got on top of him, she felt both his and her hands pulling at her clothing. Naruto spent no time in entering her with a single, fluid move. The familiar sensation of being filled made Riha gasp, and she immediately worked her hips on top of him. His hands reached up for her bouncing chest, and with each push, her shame and fears vanished. Naruto ignored the nagging feeling in the back of his head as he lost himself to the sensations of her searing warmth. If it seems too good to be true, it definitely is. With love comes pain. The more you love, the greater the pain can be. That was something he had discovered the hard way. In the infinite void of his personal alternate dimension, Naruto sat on the edge of his apartment entrance, letting his feet dangle over the edge as he stared into the endless black. Despite his blank face, his mind was a whirlwind of fury. He snarled to himself, stupid. I was so stupid. He took off his headband, letting the cloth dangle before he dropped it over the edge. He no longer cared about this village. It had become clear after a week of introspection. Crying over spilled milk won't change anything, Naruto. The heavy voice behind him went unnoticed by Naruto. Hearing a grunt, he caught the sight of brown at the corner of his eye as a recovering Pakun shifted to sit beside him, staring into the dark abyss. You know, it's been a week now since you last visited the pups at the hospital. Pakun said lightly, hoping to a response from his silent master. Hearing only silence, he sighed, slowly laying on the ground, mindful of the bandages wrapped around his body. He needed to express his gratitude to Hana for her efforts. After a period of stillness, he murmured, Naruto. It's not healthy to stay cooped into this dimension thingy staring at a. He gestured to the dark. It's depressing as fuck here. It was really the silence that bothered him. Their own voices were the only sounds audible. I want to go home, Naruto. Not stay here and have entertainment in the form of a dark abyss. There wasn't any TV here. Exasperated, Pakun said, don't you miss home? Naruto had only made one trip home during the week of self-isolation before departing. Her scent was still fresh in the air and he couldn't take the smell. So he had teleported himself here, choosing to sit for hours on end staring at an endless darkness. Pakun was unfortunate enough to have accompanied him. Why don't you go interact with your friends, huh? At the condo your voicemail was full from those missed calls from Kurenai-chan. You know how angry she gets when she's ignored. His eyes never narrowed for the pug. Pakun let out a sad sigh. Geez Naruto. I can't believe you're sitting here brooding because you got played by some chick. Wipe your ass and get over it. Like I said, crying over spilled milk won't change anything. She got you as she got all of us. How do you think the pups feel knowing their sensei only visited them once at the hospital then stayed away to go cry in a corner? What kind of coward are you? He replied with a growl. A wave of chakra struck Pakun, causing him to flinch. Naruto got up and marched across the apartment, slamming the door behind him as he left. Pakun watched with growing trepidation as Naruto's form disappeared into one of the rooms. Limping in the direction Naruto had gone, he paused at the edge of the doorway, peering into a room filled with various weapons and stockpile of armaments. A personal armory. Already knowing what he was planning, Pakun growled at him. Stop Naruto. Naruto removed his heavy green vest and put on his old Anbu armor, not even bothering to acknowledge Pakun's voice. He was at his breaking point. One could only endure so much. After putting on all of his equipment, he covered his face with a blank black Anbu mask. Adjusting his sword on the back, he attached 2 utility pouches to the back of his waist and marched out the door. As he passed him, Pakun could only observe. Naruto, think about what you're doing, he said in a desperate attempt to keep up with his pace. Imagine the consequences of your actions. You're putting everyone's lives at risk. If you do this now, you'll start a war. When he saw Naruto halt, Pakun sighed with effort, trying not to aggravate his wounds. Please listen Naruto, you need to. When Pakun heard Naruto's icy tone, he froze and stared up at his back in disbelief. Dispel Pakun. What? Naruto. He exclaimed, his eyes widening as Naruto slowly turned to face him, the Sharingan's blazing crimson visible through his eye holes. I said dispel. Pakun obeyed, calling himself in a puff of smoke while wearing a broken expression. Naruto made a hand gesture while focusing his chakra to teleport through time and space while staring at the location where the pug had been. Kurenai walked through Konoha's busy streets with a furious look on her face. She disregarded the way others avoided her as she marched forward, giving a fairly unpleasant glare to anyone unlucky enough to be caught watching. A familiar masked person who had been absent for a week was the cause of her present rage. She would express her disapproval to that nasty pervert. Who in the world did he think he was to disregard her calls? She had been attempting to get in touch with him all week to check on us, but that blonde fool had the gall to tell her he preferred to be by himself. What impudence! Giving her the cold shoulder after she allowed him to cry on hers. As she thought about his stupid smiling face, her glare intensified. Oh, she would show him why she wouldn't put up with his mannerisms for any longer. All that talk of trusting in friends had flown right over his head. Oh, give him space Kurenai, he needs some time alone. She mocked Asuma's voice, remembering the way he tried to defend Naruto's actions when he had told them he was leaving. She never felt the need to punch him in the face again. Going. He was just skilled at that. Keeping people at a distance and shutting himself off to any kind of interaction. Her eyes burned with menacing tears despite her rage. Why did he have to behave like Wei all the time? She had practically pleaded with him to remain with his pals. To be a pillar of support during his team's hospital recuperation. However, he had consistently rejected, and despite their heartfelt efforts, he was unable to overcome his worst habit. Silently suffering. They had all thought that when Kakashi died, Naruto wouldn't make it. He had poured himself more into Anbu, breaking the previous record for a squad's number of S-rank missions. After his own unit eventually burnt out, Naruto persisted, turning into a lone wolf who pursues personal goals. In essence, it was suicide. Self-destruction would eventually result from taking so many missions of that caliber. It would just take time. Naruto was compelled to take a leave of absence from the Anbu by the Hokage himself. After that, he departed. There were no farewell notes or letters indicating his destination. Nothing. He had just gotten up and walked away. It took a week for anybody to notice that Naruto was missing, and when his flat was searched, all of his belongings were discovered to be vanished. Everyone had pleaded with the Hokage to form a search party so that the small child could be found, but the Hokage had refused. She had never disliked the Hokage so deeply that she wanted to murder him until then. The night he discovered his sinister secret was the second instance. As if his inaction weren't terrible enough, Guy and Asuma worked together to prevent Naruto from attacking the Hokage because he knew she was going to leave. The Hokage had the right to put her to death right then and there, yet he told them all to leave without even reacting. They all departed after realizing that nothing would be done, their regard for the Hokage waning as they were forced to wait for Naruto to return. It had been a year. In the end, one had become two. It was a few months after the second year of his leave that rumors of a so-called Yellow Fang began to pop up around Iwagakure. Said to be the descendant of Konoha's White Fang come to lay vengeance on all her enemies. Then he came back. It had been during time when the village would annually celebrate the day of the Kyuubi attack with a huge festival. It was broadcasted event played across the entire country for anyone with the paid programming being able to view. Regretfully, it was the same date of Kakashi's death and his birthday. So everyone had found themselves gathered to silently reflect and be amongst friends. It had been during the midnight during the ending stages of the festival where the entire village would gather for a moment of silence for all those that died during the attack. And it was that very same moment that Naruto decided to appear. She remembered the shock that day when out of nowhere a toad the size of the Hokage mountain dropped into the middle of the village with the force of a bomb. In front of the population of Konoha, Fire Lord, he had decided to attend that year. Politicians, military of the entire country and Naruto had posed the big question. Am I running late? It would forever be recorded as the highest viewed Kyuubi festival in years, setting a new record for the most watched broadcasted event in the elemental nations. He even had the audacity to rejoin the Anbu the next day. And then came the Cold War that Naruto had unintentionally started by killing the Gobi Jinchuriki, Han in Iwagakure's own territory. Before she knew it, Naruto had suddenly transformed from an A-class fighter to an S-class monster, and to his complete dismay, he had become somewhat of a shinobi celebrity. The year had been fascinating. There was complete chaos produced by a 16-year-old. War was rumored to be imminent, and tensions with Iwa were high. As if it weren't terrible enough, Kumo had to attempt to abduct a Hyuga. Before the third sent out the order to assemble Konoha's soldiers, it would be the final straw. The fourth great shinobi war would take place. Hell would ensue. Many bright young children were compelled to endure the atrocities and struggles that their age went through. In an attempt to diffuse the escalating tensions, the ruling powers of each hamlet convened in a neutral area. Mifune, the land's leader, presided over the gathering in the Land of Iron. One bodyguard was permitted for each cage. Naruto was selected by the Hokage. Naruto made the decision to arrive late. According to the reports she had received, the Hokage had used a well-known three-pronged kunai far into the meeting, and Naruto had teleported there while apologizing. However, the facts were shaky. I apologize for being late, I got lost in time-space. Konoha's prayer for peace was immediately granted by the Tsuchikage and Raikage. The way things ended was nearly devastating. On some days, she hoped the fourth was still living. That Naruto's parents were still alive. That things might be different. However, those were merely desires. The terrible truth was that his deadliest enemy was now the hamlet itself. Knowing that they were replicating an army of Uzumaki from the cells of his deceased sibling, the Hokage and elders had the guts to look him in the eyes after everything he had done. It was repulsive, and was focused on their desire to keep their weapon. No, it went beyond that. Why would the Hokage finally warn Naruto about his evil actions after all these years? He was aware that Naruto wouldn't stand by while human clones were created, didn't he? In any case, it was causing Naruto pain. As she entered the more affluent areas of the village, she ignored her inner thoughts and tilted her head back to look at the top of a tall condominium. When she entered through the door, the on-duty security guard shuddered. The burly-looking man greeted them with a cautious smile. He was a former police captain who had known Naruto when the 16-year-old initially moved into the building. Kurenai smiled disarmingly and said, "Ayato-san." He groaned as she abruptly stepped forward to stand in front of him. "Gee, good morning to you, Kurenai-san. Why, you're looking lovely this morning, eh?" She scowled at a man twice her size and weight, and it was almost comical to watch him tremble. She growled and said, "Is Naruto in?" Ayato gave a nervous shrug. He hadn't seen the boy in a week. "Why, yep. Jay just saw him this morning." He lied with a shaky smile, gulping as her crimson eyes seemed to burn with rage. He knew that telling her no would be the incorrect response. Kurenai gave him a cautious look and nodded in agreement before making her way to the elevators. She pressed a button, waited a few seconds for the door to open, and then pressed another button to access the top floor. Ayato slumped with relaxation after waiting for the doors to close. These kids were too much for Kami's elderly heart to bear. He almost had a heart attack when Naruto, who appeared to be death itself, stomped through the entryway almost 2 weeks ago, and now Kurenai has followed. Ayato moaned to himself, "Why did I accept this job?" As terrible music played, Kurenai calmly waited for the elevator to reach the top floor while making a concerted effort to control her temper. She looked at the fist-shaped indentation carved into the titanium walls with an odd twist of her head. She simply had to take a few steps to reach the penthouse door after the elevator opened with a ding after reaching the top floor. She marched to the door and beat on it so forcefully that it shook rather than bothering to knock. "Naruto Namikaze, you open this door right now or else," she exclaimed as a seal appeared on the door, momentarily shimmering as it sensed her presence. The door creaked open to let her enter. Yes, she had forgotten that the seal recognized her chakra. She slammed the door behind her as she entered his flat through the door. She removed her sandals and moved into the living room, gazing about the quiet condo. She yelled, "Naruto," in an attempt to make her presence known. She scowled when she received no response. She had to marvel at the interior of such a living place as she strolled around for a while. Everything in sight was immaculate and polished, making it the epitome of luxury. She had to wonder what Naruto's monthly salary was. Her paychecks were likely equal to his maintenance payments alone. Wealthy jerk. She made her way toward the main bedroom in the corridor. She marched inside after kicking open the door in the hopes of catching him, but she didn't see anyone. She could only shake her head as she looked around the room. She was disappointed by the room's interior decor. Kurenai became envious of the snowy carpeted flooring, matching ebony dressers, and king-side bed. In comparison to this, her own bedroom wouldn't even be considered garbage. She wagered that the items in this room would cost more than half of her entire apartment and a year's salary. She let out a sigh. It wasn't equitable. She would do anything to have this bed. She started to walk away, but then she paused. She was the only person in the apartment, so it was clear that Naruto wasn't there. Abruptly, she shook her head. She thought to herself, "No, Kurenai, you're supposed to be pissed off." She would not give in to temptation. She bit her lip as she looked back at the bed. The sheets of sapphire silk seemed so seductive. Additionally, those pillows appeared to be queen-sized. She reluctantly peered out and stared at the living room as her anger subsided. It was all clear. She went forward, leapt onto the big bed, and rolled around on the sapphire sheets while giggling mischievously. She probably wouldn't have another opportunity to sleep in a bed worth more than her, even though it was terribly immature. Enjoying the divine aroma, she turned over and rubbed her face on the silky sapphire cheeks. She disregarded both the idea that it was Naruto's bed and the voice in the back of her mind reminding her that she shouldn't be lying in someone else's bed. However, it was incredibly soft. She groaned contentedly as she nestled into the plush pillows. How she wished she could spend all of eternity in this bed. If other women saw a bed like this in her, just think of how envious they would be. "What are you doing?" The sound of the voice tumbling out of the bed startled Kurenai, who let out a eep. She stroked her head, moaning, then stopped when she saw sandals. She looked up at the black Anbu armor and matching black mask that were staring blankly down at her. Kurenai asked in disbelief, "And Naruto? Why did he have all that equipment?" Naruto looked down at him from behind his mask. Kurenai looked at him in disbelief for a moment before her expression darkened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. She stood up fast and shoved him roughly in the face, but all she was able to do was make him take a step back. She growled and repeated, "What am I doing here? Where have you been, huh? All week I've been trying to contact you and see how you were, but all I got in return was the cold shoulder. Who the fuck do you think you were disappearing like that, making everyone think you left or worst even killed yourself?" Seeing him stare, she growled, "Answer me." Naruto pulled away from her with a chilly expression. "Go home, Kurenai," he replied, casting a sidelong glance at her figure. He said gloomily, "Or better yet, leave the village." As he walked out the doorway, Kurenai looked at his back in disbelief. She spotted him enter the living room as she hurried after him and stopped when she noticed several scrolls on the coffee table. Her stomach fell at the possibilities as she saw him start to seal them away. Now he was staring at this war. Her hands automatically grabbed the scroll thrown at her and said, "Give this to my team." He approached her and stated, "It's filled with explanations of the Uchiha massacre and a reverse-engineered key to Konohamaru's seal." He moved past her and toward the door, saying, "There's also a bank account number that's for a trust fund that I've set up for them. They'll find over 50 million in cash saved for when they reach 16. It's to be split evenly." For a brief moment, Kurenai's body remained motionless while her mind absorbed what he had just told her. He abruptly stopped, turned to face her, and raised 3 fingers. "Tell them I'll come for them in 3 years and no 5 at tops, okay? They'll understand." She tossed the scroll at his head while observing him reach for the door handle. His hand shot up and caught it without even pausing or turning around. Kurenai only needed to exchange herself with the scroll, use an instant replacement, and knock him away from the door. Her red eyes sharpened at him as she blocked the door, You're not leaving here. He was unable to initiate this conflict at this time. At least not without a plan. Knowing him, he was going to storm Konoha with guns blazing in order to reach the elders. Behind his mask, Naruto's eyes narrowed. You're trying to stop me? What happened to all that Naruto-sama bullshit? Kurenai gave him an equally keen look in response. We will stand with you. But not like this, she said, pointing to his armor. Despite your strength you can't go up against Konoha by yourself. That's suicide, Naruto. She yelled in agony. You'll die before you reach the Hokage Tower. Naruto shook his head and moaned. It was clear that she had never seen Sage Mode. Move Kurenai. They disregarded him. Think about this, Naruto. Your genin are in the hospital while their sensei plans to kill the elders. What do you think will happen to them after this is all over? They'll be crushed knowing that you left them over some personal vendetta. All I want to do is kill the elders and get the fuck out. And how do you plan do that, Naruto? She yelled, frustrated that she couldn't reach him. In a 10-minute time frame. Kurenai thought she had heard incorrectly as she gazed at him. Did you just say a stabilized rosin bolt to paralyze the population for exactly 10 minutes? A rosin skuriken then thrown at the Hokage Tower. Of course the elders would be already moved underground, so a rosin drill would flush them out. Kill them all, then find those labs and destroy them. When that's all done I would have to make a run for it, hopefully making it out of the country by nightfall. After that, who knows? Perhaps he would head to Kiri. There are rumors that they were granting missing relatives political refuge. For a cost. She would be lying if she claimed not to be shocked, even though she knew she shouldn't be. He was certain he could reach the elders, but it would be very challenging to get past Anbu en route. If all else fails, use this Kamui and send myself and everyone around me to oblivion. He would therefore at least take those bastards with him if he was going to die. He had spent the entire week practicing. After finishing his sentence, Naruto attempted to proceed, but Kurenai once more stopped him. With tears in her eyes, she questioned, so you plan to kill yourself if you fail? Naruto only sighed at her resolve. He shot back, saying, be thankful I'm not planning to destroy the village. Even if he did, he would take care to keep the hospital safe. Kurenai gave him a stern look while holding back her emotions. That's not what you mean. I'll kill anyone that gets in my way. Naruto's patience ran out, and he advanced menacingly. Kurenai was already blitzing through hand seals, and Naruto stopped as she vanished in front of him. He grunted and scowled as he was abruptly pinned to a tree, with a big root coiling around him. He tilted his head back and saw Kurenai appear out of the tree's trunk, holding a kunai to his throat. Please, Naruto, don't make me. Her eyes grew wide as their positions abruptly changed, with Naruto standing in front of her and her stuck to the tree. When he did, though, she saw the red glow in his eyehole and swore. Reflection on Genjutsu. Naruto turned in time to see Kurenai extend her leg to wrap around the wire before she stomped on the ground, causing him to stagger forward. Naruto started to proceed toward the entrance after witnessing her freeze, but he halted as a wire wrapped around his forearm. Because he was unsteady on his feet, Naruto barely managed to block the kick that knocked him onto his back. He quickly rolled to his feet, dodging her attempt to stomp on his head, and retaliated with a fist aimed at her face. She ducked the blow, tugging hard on the wire, throwing him forward, rocketing upwards with an uppercut that Naruto flipped backwards to avoid. Naruto's boots hit her chin with the force of his flip, causing her head to snap upward. Then, he blitzed forward, wrapped a hand around her throat, choked her, and smashed her to the ground. Kurenai, don't let me harm you. He flinched as she spat blood into his eye opening, then rolled while encircling her arm around her throat with her knees. Naruto managed to free himself from her, but Kurenai kicked him back, flipped to her feet, and tugged on the wire still encircling his arm. Fearing that his arm would break in two, he rolled with her until they both fell across the living room and finally stopped as they hit the couch. Kurenai was propelled hurtling at Naruto after he felt the drag and used both of his arms to pull against her. However, she used the momentum to turn over and twirl in midair, causing the wire to wrap around his throat in an amazing display of flexibility. Kurenai dropped on her back right behind him, sent him to his knees with a kick to the back of his legs, and then used all of her might to pull. Naruto gasped as lengthy legs abruptly wrapped around his neck, further cutting off his oxygen supply, and his arm wrenched back at the same moment as he choked from the wire around his neck. He abruptly vanished in a puff of smoke just as it appeared that he was going to faint. Panting in disbelief, Kurenai turned just in time to see hands encircle her throat and feel herself hurled through the air, smashing violently against the wall. Before gravity could lower her body, Naruto was standing in front of her, pinning her to the wall with his wrist. He simply crushed his body into hers to pin her, even as her hanging feet kicked against his chest. As he watched her struggle, Naruto said, "Enough, Kurenai." Naruto was too strong for any comparison, and she had no idea that she had been fighting a shadow clone the entire time. It was a futile battle. She had no chance of defeating him or even thinking about stopping him. With a sigh as she continued to ignore him, Naruto took off his black mask with his free arm and pinned it to his belt. His eyes softened as he looked directly into her eyes and said, "Despite what you all said to me that night, I can't let any of you do this." He was the only one who wanted to be held accountable and take the fall. "So you would simply abandon everyone?" Kurenai snarled at him as she attempted to break free of his grip. Naruto nodded and felt her body relax against him. "I already told you I'll come back in a few years, Kurenai-chan," she abruptly said, staring at him with an indescribable emotion. "If you leave." Naruto remained motionless for a few seconds before closing his eyes and sighing, removing his wrist from her throat, causing her to fall to her feet, and putting an arm around her waist to steady her. "Kurenai-chan, you don't understand. Yes, I do. I understand so much it hurts," she yelled at him. With tears welling up in her eyes, she added, "You showed everyone your memories, but they didn't feel what I did. The pain, agony, betrayal. The rage. I understand how badly you want to murder them, Naruto, but it's not the appropriate time." If only she knew, Naruto truly wanted to laugh. "So what have you got me to then? Wait till the old man dies of a heart attack before I kill him?" he asked, making fun of her. "Or perhaps allow them to carry on creating clones somewhere? Or are you all reconsidering everything?" he said, narrowing his eyes at her. Despite anticipating the smack, he accepted it. "Naruto, don't you dare label me a coward. My words weren't just talk," she growled at him. "So, what are you asking me to do?" Naruto gave her a growl in return. Kurenai whispered, "Endure, Naruto." As the tears finally started to fall. "You have to endure." He watched silently as she sobbed in front of him before her sobs filled the quiet apartment. Without saying anything, he pulled her arm into a warm embrace, guided her head to his shoulder, and ran his fingers through her long black hair. He couldn't help but think about that same night, when their roles had been reversed, and she mirrored his thoughts as she put her arms around his waist and held him close, even though her shoulders trembled. Naruto relished the moment, taking a deep breath and breathing in her rose-scented aroma before he started to separate from her. "I've endured enough." After saying so, Naruto started to draw away from her but stopped when he felt a gentle, almost pleading tug on his arm. He looked down to see her fingers entwined with his, and when he raised his eyes to her face, he saw her red, weeping eyes glowing with an emotion he was unable to pinpoint. Kurenai gently begged, "Please. Stay." Naruto shook his head slowly, raising his palm to her face to wipe away her tears. "I can't," she said, "then stay with me." Her gentle fingertips fingered the edge of his mask and slowly pulled the cloth down. Neither of them noticed what she had said, but something happened, and like two halves piecing together, they slowly started to draw toward one another. She didn't even think about Asuma when the material came off and she looked at his face for the first time. She couldn't stop her hand from lifting to gently stroke the lines on his cheek, and that was all it took for Naruto to begin leaning in her direction. This was wrong. He knew he should have left by now, but it felt so right at the same time. "Are we interfering?" Kurenai's eyes narrowed at the figures at his door, and he scowled as she thankfully put off his mask. He felt Kurenai flinch at the sound of the soft-spoken voice coming from behind him. "You're late. Sorry, we had to take the long way around to sneak in here, Naruto-san." This voice was different from the previous one. It was rougher and had a cheeky tone, almost like he was smiling. When Naruto eventually moved out of Kurenai's way so she could see the figures at his door, fear struck her like a lightning strike. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki both took off their straw hats and gave her a puzzled look. Kurenai stared at the two missing nin, admiring their clothing. Red clouds and matching black cloaks. "Naruto, where are the fireworks? I thought you'd start by now." Kisame pouted at him. "Who's the babe?" he said, turning his little round eyes to a surprised woman. He inquired, winking charmingly at her. "Yes, Naruto, I had assumed that you would have already killed the Hokage. Unless, of course, there were unpleasant complications. I'm surprised you let this lovers' quarrel drag on for so long," Itachi said, gazing at Kurenai as if she were an insect about to be crushed. After taking a quick look at the trembling Kurenai, Naruto shrugged and said, "She was troublesome." "Whatever, are we doing this?" muttered Kisame, clutching his sword's handle in frustration. Even Itachi was staring at him hopefully. Naruto turned to face the startled Kurenai and grinned, saying, "See, I wasn't doing this alone. I called in some friends." He scowled as her eyes rolled into her head. "Give a thump." Observing the unconscious woman on the ground, Itachi sighed and said, "Only you, Naruto." "You silver-tongued devil," Kisame said with a smile. "I think we are fighting a losing battle." When Hiruzen told him that he intended to fight Naruto with the Leaf's army, he instantly believed that the monkey had finally reached old age and become senile. However, it only took 2 sentences for him to understand why Hiruzen was prepared to go to such extremes. Sharingan Mangekyo. He and his longtime rival sat down to drink sake together for the first time in years until they were both inebriated. 2 of his most promising root agents were gone, and to make matters worse, Hiruzen was talking to him about the civil war. His agent had been slain and failed to conceive, and because he had not heard from his other agent Fu, he assumed that Naruto had also killed him. He undoubtedly planned to launch a war. He had to raise his hand to stop Hiruzen from screaming about Naruto's strength and how he was unmatched, but he remained silent and listened. Danzo lowered his hand and gave his former teammate a critical look. "Hiruzen, where is your spine?" Hiruzen blanched at the question, only a sip away from total inebriation. What? A sneer curved Danzu's lips. "Your backbone, you fool. Have you been so terrified of that boy that you are unable to think clearly? Look at you've become pathetic." Scared to even look him in the eye, the Hokage said, recoiling as if the words had hit him. "The so-called shinobi god, where are you? The sound of your name used to make our foes shudder, if not run away as soon as you entered the battlefield. What happened to the man?" Danzo snarled as he concluded. Hiruzen bowed his head in shame and ran a weary hand through his graying hair as his words struck his former friend hard. Danzo was grinning to himself behind his angry face. "One more shove. Where is your fire will?" Danzo leaned back in his chair, placed his good arm on the circular table they were seated at, and tapped his finger on the wood in contemplation. Hiruzen did not appear to respond to the phrase, but Danzo could tell by the distant expression in his eyes that his teammate had understood. He started to say something, but Hiruzen cut him off. "What do you suggest we do?" Hiruzen asked, glancing up at him cautiously. Danzo couldn't help but smile as he leaned forward and beckoned Hiruzen to approach. "First and foremost, I need Root to be able to operate at full capacity," he said. "A blank check. I'm currently training my young proto-copyright ga copyright, but I can say that my strongest agent right now is Torun," he said, stroking his chin. "I lost 2 of my best agents and I can't afford to lose any more." After a moment of hesitation, Hiruzen sighed in agreement, and Danzo requested his second request with a cheerful smile. "Do you recall what Tobirama-sensei used to say all the time?" Hiruzen blinked as his enormous memory needed a few moments to recall his youth. "The strongest of opponents always has a weakness." "You obviously don't want to confront him. You acknowledge that as well. So why not attack people who are closest to him? Take Riha, for instance." Danzo disregarded the manner in which she perished, saying, "I made him fall in love with my seductress and in return he killed her. However, in return his heart was weakened. Weak and susceptible to assault. We can take advantage of this and launch a strike." Hiruzen squinted at his former teammate as he realized what he was implying. No, not at all. Even though he was desperate, he wouldn't let it. "Sarutobi." Danzo started out very serious. It's clear that Naruto no longer cares about Konoha. His friends and classmates are what he is concerned about. Imagine hitting them in front of his eyes. In the end, he would fall. Hiruzen shook his head and crushed his teeth together. No. Knowing the deeper significance behind Hiruzen's expression, the third sighed and lifted a hand to rub his head as Danzo leaned back and stared at his comrade blankly, raising an eyebrow. "I can't, Danzo," his teammate said right away. "Why not?" "Because." Hiruzen sighed, his eyes growing far away. Danzo frowned and shook his head slowly. "You're amazing, you know that. I thought you were at last displaying some strength, but now you've returned to being a whiny pussy." Hiruzen sighed after staring at his former partner, nearly taken aback by his use of such profanity. He understood precisely what Danzo was referring to, from that day, and how it still troubled him. Danzo seized the chance after realizing that Hiruzen was aware of what he was thinking. Hiruzen was currently open and would likely never have another opportunity like this. "Hiruzen, why did you kill her?" He froze at the abrupt inquiry, then turned back to his teammate and noticed Danzo staring at him with a slightly cocked head. Hiruzen pretended not to know, staring down at the sake cup he was holding before raising it to his lips and sipping the brown liquid. "Kill who, Danzo?" The burn was completely ineffective, Before turning to face Hiruzen with a pitying expression, Danzo genuinely laughed. Do you really want me to say her name, Hiruzen? He recalled how long it took Hiruzen to stabilize mentally, and how his former teammate had to go to a Yamanaka therapist in order to have the memories erased from his brain. For some weird, inexplicable reason, those memories refused to be erased, almost as if they were a punishment that Hiruzen would have to endure for the rest of his life. It was an inexplicable occurrence. Hiruzen was virtually pleading, please Danzo. Don't do this, not right now. Why Hiruzen? Danzo shrugged. What do you fear so much? He really scowled at the idea of telling Naruto or anybody else. After witnessing what Naruto had done to Riha, he could only picture what he would do to Hiruzen. Danzo, just stop it. Let the past stay that way. After all these years, my dear friend, you are the one who is still in pain. Homura, Kaharu, and I are not the ones who struggle with anxiousness. You are. You're the one who hasn't let go of the pasta, or rather, I should say you can't let go. He was aware that he had touched a nerve because Hiruzen gave him a deadly stare. Not another word, Danzo. Danzo gave him a stern look in return and stood his position, saying, I want to know why. Be quiet, Danzo. No, why did you kill her, please? I told you to keep quiet. Tell M.A. Quiet. The third Hokage slammed his fist down on the round table, shattering it instantly, and Danzo watched blankly as his old teammate stared him down, panting. Hiruzen took a few deep breaths to gather himself before straightening, and they both stared at each other in silence, one with barely concealed hatred and the other with blank empathy. Danzo shook his head and broke eye contact. He muttered in a patronizing tone, coward. What were you saying? Danzo was unaffected by the oppressive pressure, but Hiruzen grounded out and stood up. His massive chakra started to spike quickly, causing the walls surrounding them to crack and shatter under the weight of the intense pressure. He relished the fiery taste of sake and continued, I said you're a coward. Hiruzen bared his teeth as he started to run chakra through his arm, pushing Danzo deeper into the wall until spider webs started to form in the stone. Despite the situation, Danzo remained motionless, staring down at Hiruzen with complete composure. Suddenly, Danzo found himself slammed into a wall with a hand wrapped around his throat. Hiruzen growled in a menacing voice, your next words may be your last, speak carefully, my friend. Despite his arrogance, Hiruzen was shaking, and Danzo mocked, I have neither fear, nor a single ounce of respect from the words of a coward. Danzo understood that Hiruzen had always been scared, fearing that Naruto would discover the secret he had worked so hard to maintain and that the awful truth would come out. I'm not scared, Hiruzen snarled. As the laughter subsided, Danzo bowed his head at Hiruzen and said, Sarutobi, you've been afraid of Naruto since he was born. It was not a chuckle, but a full-fledged laugh, cold, harsh, and utterly contemptuous of Hiruzen. Hiruzen recoiled and let go of Danzo. Why did you murder Kushina? Hiruzen's entire body shook at the sound of her name, and he collapsed to the ground, panting fiercely as sweat trickled down his body and dampened his robes. Danzo did not move or raise a hand to assist his comrade as he continued to shiver uncontrollably. Hiruzen reached under his robes with a quivering hand and took out a little metal container, which rattled in his palms as the tiny objects inside started to dance and make jingling noises. Hiruzen struggled mightily to open the container, but his body gave way with a spasm, causing the container to fall from his hands and the little white pills within to spill into the floorboards. Hiruzen gritted his teeth in agony, gasping and covering his chest with his palm. Hiruzen. The longtime teammates both jumped at the sound of the voice, panicking as the fourth Hokage appeared in a flash of golden light. What have you done? The memories caused his body to jerk, and he started coughing furiously. With a look of such unadulterated malice that both Hiruzen and Danzo recoiled and took tentative steps back, Minato locked eyes with Hiruzen while the enormous spectral form behind him started to suck his soul from his body. Form was covered in blood, and his white cloak was shredded to tatters. You'll pay for this, Minato said, his body shaking as he exposed his fangs. I promise it before I die. You'll pay. Hiruzen's body trembled with overwhelming horror as the Shinigami's mouth opened wide and a long, serpentine tongue ran hungrily along its lips as the ghost slowly turned its head and pinned him under its timeless gaze upon hearing his words. Linger in Fira, for the belly of the Shinigami hungers for your soul. His eyes seemed to glow with malice as his skin turned pale. Naruto will come for you. Minato used the last of his chakra to send a blast of killing intent so strong that both men fell to their knees as the last remnants of his soul began to be sucked from his body. As the Shinigami's mouth opened wide to devour Minato's soul, his body collapsed to the ground. Danzo and Hiruzen, on their knees, trembled in utter despair as they heard the terrifying whisper before the spectral figure disappeared from view. And I will be waiting. Hiruzen's heart began to beat dangerously fast, causing him to lurch and gasp for air. His vision dimmed, and he started to feel numb. Suddenly, his mouth was forced open, and something small was dropped into it. Hiruzen instinctively swallowed, feeling the effects immediately as his heart rate slowed and the trembling stopped. When his vision returned, he looked up in shock at Danzu's expressionless face while the man stared down at him. Panting, Hiruzen placed a palm on his chest before turning to the last person he ever believed would save him. Danzo offered his one good arm and gently brushed off the dust on his back as he helped his former teammate stand. He reluctantly said, "Thank you." He was genuinely shocked because he had assumed Danzo would simply watch him die. If he had died a withering heap on the floor, it would have been nearly impossible for him to fulfill his ultimate aim of becoming Hokage. Danzo bent down to pick up the white hat that had been neglected and put it on Hiruzen's head. When he saw that Hiruzen was all right, he nodded, picked up his cane, and started to hobble away. It was inevitable. One day Naruto will find out the truth. Danzu's thoughts turned to the day after Kakashi's death, when a small group of Konoha's shinobi, led by Danzo, had made their way to the Sound Village. Itachi had massacred his clan overnight, but Naruto had destroyed an entire village in a single night. I pray when that day comes, you'll be ready for him. Hiruzen sighed as he watched the man slowly vanish through a door, then scowled as he looked down at the spilled tablets and stooped to pick them up one by one while considering Danzu's question. He told himself, "I'm not afraid." He saw how Naruto had handled his rude double agent, watching in utter horror as her body exploded violently in a shower of gore. He saw the bloody message he had left for Danzo and couldn't help but wonder if it was for him. But the trembles would never stop. He was terrified. Death is hungry for Hiruzen's soul, which is another horrifying secret that has come to light. I wonder what other secrets he may be harboring. Oh my goodness, I already have everything planned out for when it happens. The devastation will be stunning. Viewers will simply have to endure the wait. You'll never know how tempting it was not to let those three go wild around the village. I apologize for keeping you all waiting so long, but if you're disappointed that there were no Team 7 interactions, you'll get it in the next chapter. As for the next update, I won't make any promises, but I'm working on the next chapter whenever I can. Please stay tuned. Alright, 2 requests. Please read. I really don't want to ask because I've had unreliable betas in the past, but I'm politely requesting one because I hate mistakes, you hate mistakes, and we all hate mistakes. I write these long-ass chapters by myself and have to edit them by myself. Even though I read this shit 3 times over, I might still miss some grammatical errors. Beta. 3 prerequisites. 1. You must be able to tolerate my insanity. 2. You must be willing to be spoiled and read lengthy chapters that share your thoughts and opinions. And 3. You must be able to tell some good jokes. If you're interested, send me a private message. However, I probably won't check my messages for a few days. Edit. No more requests accepted. Second request. Read some of my friend Solara Miles's amazing works, especially The Pain of a New Day and What It Takes to Be Hokage. He writes some really wonderful stories that aren't getting many views. Policy. P.S. This is one of the sequences that was eliminated before I decided to turn it into an omake. Enjoy. Recall that I rewrote this chap around 6 times. A motorboat Kurenai, wearing her well-known bandaged dress, navigated the hospital's crowded hallways while dodging rushing staff members. Since she wasn't on active duty today, she had abandoned her headband, letting her black hair fall over her face. Fingering the plastic bag of takeout ramen in her hands, she made her way toward Naruto's hospital room. As she got closer, she noticed 2 Anbu soldiers on either side of the door. She grinned at one of them, who nodded and gently opened the door to let her in. She thanked him and entered the chamber, hearing the door shut behind her. She walked over to Naruto's bedside and sat on the edge of the bed, grinning softly at his serene face, giggling as she heard his snores. He wasn't moving in his sleep, and the last 2 times he appeared to be having nightmares, so she hesitated before taking a chance and gently shaking his sleeping form. The last time she had attempted to wake him, she almost broke her arm, sliced her throat, and gave herself a headache. She bit her lip. Naruto. When he didn't move, she shifted in bed and inadvertently brought the steamy ramen bag closer to his face. She started gently getting ready to jump back if necessary. His nose twitched, but she never saw the change in his mask. Give a thump. After Kurenai fell backward from the bed due to the impact, the ramen bag slipped from her grasp and landed in Naruto's lap. Naruto's eyes opened instantly, focusing on the source of the heavenly smell, and he closed his eyes while taking deep breaths. His hazy mind took a few seconds to shake off the last effects of a surprisingly restful sleep. He sniffed, ramen. Miso ramen. With pork fillet at the side. He raised the bag to the ceiling, tipped his head back, and yelled, "May Kami bless the soul that brought me this delicious sacred food." Without further ado, he opened the bag and stopped when he saw that it contained not one but two huge portions. His eyes glowing with hunger, Naruto tore the plastic from one of the chopsticks and opened the foam cover, pulling down his mask with his fingers until he saw blood. Naruto looked over the edge of the bed and was startled to see Kurenai looking numbly up at the ceiling with a hand on her head. He followed her stare and saw nothing but a white ceiling, so he arched an eyebrow at her. "Hey Kurenai," she said, carefully turning to face him. "What are you doing on the chilly floor?" Naruto cautiously offered her the styrofoam bowl after she stared at him until the stillness got awkward. He looked at the ramen in his hands, then back at her, then back at the ramen once more. Would you like some ramen?" Kurenai stood up very slowly, dusting herself off without averting her eyes from Naruto's conflicted gaze. Naruto watched anxiously as she touched the tiny red spot on her forehead, and he was grateful that his mask covered his smile because the mark nearly matched the colors of her eyes, giving the impression that she had a third E. "Why do I always get harmed when I try to wake you? I mean, I just finished taking my aspirins from your last headbutt and now I'm going to have to go to the convenience store and buy more." As she edged closer, Naruto's back struck the headboard, effectively cutting off any chance of escape. The question was rhetorical. It was a long way down, so he hesitantly glanced at the window before changing his mind. Naruto shook as she gritted her teeth and said, "I walk all the way from Ichiraku Ramen to check up on you and the thanks I get is a headbutt." Her red eyes seemed to sparkle. "Headbutt, headbutt." Naruto instantly shielded his ramen from danger as she suddenly sprang for him and wrapped her arms around his throat, but he became alarmed when he saw the plastic bag containing the other ramen dangling perilously over the edge of the bed. "You stubborn oaf." Kurenai abruptly moved and pinned his reaching arm with a knee, leaving Naruto with nothing to do but watch as the ramen tumbled over the bed and spilled on the floor. She gritted her teeth as she tightened her grip, and Naruto disregarded the pain as he extended his hand to save the priceless ramen. "Oh no." When they heard the shout from outside, the two agents manning the door ran into the room with their swords drawn, only to have their mouths fall behind their masks. They weren't shocked because Kurenai was actually straddling his waist from her position, having climbed on top of him so her hands could reach his throat. Naruto's loose slacks appeared to have fallen due to the efforts, and her bandage dress had come undone slightly, exposing a substantial amount of cleavage through the fishnet she wore below. Both of them had untidy hair and were panting, with Naruto holding a ramen cup. One of the agents actually removed his mask to reveal a pale face, rubbed both of his eyes, and looked at the scene. Yes, he was witnessing Kurenai Yuhi on top of Naruto Namikaze before putting his mask back on and pointing to his numb comrade. "Come on man, we don't get paid enough for this shit." Kurenai and Naruto exited the room, leaving the two occupants behind. Kurenai and Naruto stared at the location where Enbu had just been, and at last they saw each other. At the same time, both of their faces turned red, and Kurenai looked down to see one hand resting on his chest and the other on his stomach. She inadvertently lowered her gaze and saw black boxers. Naruto, on the other hand, could only watch as her chest rose and fell with every breath she took. "Holy shit Kurenai, your tits are huge." He asked the question that had immediately come to him since he knew he would probably never get another opportunity like this. "Am I able to motorboat you?" Kurenai paused as she was about to step away from him, raising a delicate eyebrow in bewilderment and frowning. "Motorboat?" Naruto's mask moved as he smiled. "Hold still." He leaned up and fingered the edges of his mask. After a few minutes, Kurenai sat on the side of the bed with her clothing straight and a decent amount of space between her and the other person. Ignoring the heat on her cheeks, she crossed her arms beneath her breast and scowled at the wall. With one eye swollen shut and his hair drenched in ramen broth, Naruto managed to giggle, making her sneer at him as he painfully smiled at her colored cheeks that revealed her expression. "I'm never talking to you again." With a painful shrug, Naruto said, "So totally worth it. I am deserving of death. A protracted, tortuous, pitiful, meaningless death rather than on the battlefield like a true warrior. Even hell would not accept me because of the numerous atrocities and sins I have committed. I feel it every day. A persistent presence. Naturally, nothing is there when I turn to look, however, I still sense it. Eyes observing me. When I'm at home, at work, or on the streets. Even when I'm asleep. I am aware of what it is. I've long since come to terms with the fact that someone is always with me, observing and patiently waiting forever. However, it is becoming stronger and more apparent these days, almost as if years of surveillance are finally coming to an end. On my end, I have no knowledge of God since I have spent so much time in a life filled with violence and bloodshed. Many shinobi are aware that religion is meaningless in a life like this. While some may concur and others may not, the truth is that you cannot be saved by praying to a higher power. You won't be more likely to survive if you ask a priest for a blessing. You won't get a miracle just because you have faith. Even though I don't believe in God, I do believe in a single entity. Death. You cannot be saved by anything. It is unavoidable and unstoppable. Something that seemed out of my control. Until then, I saw a man, a mere mortal, call forth death. It would almost seem impossible for a higher being beyond the scope of our trivial minds to be beckoned by a simple set of hand signs and careful application of chakra. The fact that the Uzumaki clan originated jutsu astounds me. How in the world did seal masters devise a jutsu that summons the god of death? How? Before my world abruptly stopped that day, these were the questions that were going through my head. My replacement let out a scream of wrath, and I couldn't help but marvel how a human face could ever convey such hatred. Death had heard him, whether it was his shout or the way he was about to die. As I saw the ghostly figure turn to face me, I became aware of this. I looked directly into Death's face for those brief moments. I sensed it. There are no words to express it, it couldn't be put into words, it was just unfathomable. But my goodness, I sensed it. An endless yearning that cannot be satisfied. One that was nourished by the eternal soul's life source. From its innards, I could hear the reverberating screams of souls trapped in eternal damnation. And those eyes looked straight through me, to the depths of my spirit, beyond the scope of human seeing. Surveying, measuring, as one may examine a dish. It tasted the air with a long, serpentine tongue that slithered from its jaws. Tasting my spirit. Then it grinned. Death is ravenous for my soul. And I can't be saved from that by anything. Hiruzen Sarutobi. The third Hokage quickly stuffed his pipe with cannabis, lighting the pipe with a flicker of chakra and inhaling the relaxing hallucinogen to stem the flow of tremors that began to rack his body. He unlocked one of his desk drawers and took out a small plastic bag full of crushed green plants and leaves because the tiny amount in his pipe was insufficient. He opened it, took a handful of the medicine, and shoved it into his mouth, chewing it nearly feverishly. He brought his pipe back to his mouth and took long, deep puffs after swallowing hard. Due to allegations of substance usage, his doctors had refused to give him any more CNS depressants after he had nearly finished them. The idiots. He required more. Badly. The tremors stopped, and he experienced a blanketing feeling in his brain. He kept taking deep breaths and exhaled lengthy puffs of smoke while sinking in his chair. The heavy scent filled his office, the fumes clouding the air with a heavy smell, but at the moment he simply didn't care. He just sat there, completely satisfied, letting his thoughts wander. He was relaxed, mellow, and as cool as cucumber without a care in the world. His mind wandered back to the clan wars due to his stoned state. It was thought that the Uchiha and Senju clans were the strongest. With their unparalleled skill, they are the most feared in the entire country. Full of people that no shinobi would ever want to encounter in combat. They were similar to water and oil. Mortal enemies with a bitter rivalry that spanned from the time of their ancestors. It was never even considered that the two clans would unite. So it came as shock in the era of the clan wars, when the most powerful clans in history decided to form an alliance together and create the very first hidden village. Abruptly, he started laughing to himself. He began to laugh so hard that tears began to run down his face. By the time he finished, his stomach was aching, and he was rapidly panting from being short of breath. He detested the red-eyed bastards, therefore it was always about the Senju and fucking Uchiha. The fact that both of those clans regarded each other equally seemed to go unnoticed. Even the Uchiha harbored some residual terror of the Senju's supposed cousins. The first secret settlement was established in the long-gone land of whirlpools, but it was never documented in history. Without a doubt, the most powerful clan in the world was the fabled Uzumaki clan. They were known by all, and feared by all. It was due to their unparalleled, unprecedented expertise in the sealing arts, not merely their powerful chakra or members who have been known to survive on this planet for almost 200 years. Even the powerful Senju and Uchiha were hesitant to engage in combat with true masters of their craft. Imagine the shock to the world when the wife of Hashirama Senju, Mito Uzumaki, sealed away the Kyuubi inside of her, becoming its very first Jinchuriki. Such deeds were unheard of and regarded as myths. All that remains are far-off myths from the Sage of the Six Paths era. Their bodies were ideal hosts for all Biju, not just the Kyuubi. Potent chakra, extreme life forces giving them longevity, they were meant to be Jinchuriki. It was a theory amongst many that their blood relation to the Senju was much more significant. Were there only two sons of the Rakudo Sanin? Was there another child? It was entirely speculation, but chakra such as theirs didn't go without question. But for all their prowess and skill, they were a peace-loving clan. Not ones to initiate conflict and never ones to relish in combat. It was said they were more philosophers than combatants. Historians, teachers, scientists, essentially polymaths in an era of war. Prone to studying the secrets of chakra, over the ways of battle. Seekers of knowledge, in a time where bloodshed was the very way of life. By the time the major hidden villages had established, and the 5 great nations began to rise in power, Uzushiogakure was in consideration to becoming the 6th. If the war hadn't broken out, they would have received the championship. The daimyos wanted to gain more authority, and nations had started to aggressively enlarge their borders. All of the villages suffered terrible losses in the First Great Ninja War, with Konoha losing the first Hokage at the beginning and the second Hokage at the end. Hiruzen grimaced abruptly. Despite his strength, Hashirama Senju was overly idealistic and naive. In order to foster peace, he had used his tremendous strength to tame all 9 of the tailed beasts and distributed them to the other nations like candies. The very animals he had given the nations were used as weapons of war, thus the peace didn't even last long. Then, soon after abandoning his brother to face his errors, the man passed away. The Uzumaki's prompt assistance was what kept Konoha from being completely destroyed. The world was made aware of Seal Master's actual power at that precise moment. Their demise was caused by their urge to defend their lone ally. He had seen it all. The man who had been waiting for the right opportunity to attack while lying in the shadows. His goals would be seriously threatened by Uzushiogakure, so they had to be dealt with, forever. When Hiruzen first saw the man, he was only a toddler. His visage was as impassive as it was eerie, his stare as frigid as ice, and his mane as dark as nightfall. He was only able to shudder in front of the man he believed to be dead after all these years. Orbs of burning crimson that seemed to pierce his soul. His response was met with a nasty, haughty grin. The voice was the cause. That same mocking, arrogant, deep, condescending voice. You will start this war, little monkey. So started the Second Great Shinobi War. It was the most devastating of all the wars in history. Not even the Third Great Shinobi War could compare to the brutality and sheer lives lost of the Second. In this state of total war, the major countries threw their entire economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities behind the war effort, erasing the distinction between civilian and military resources. It jumpstart the birth of modern warfare between the shinobi nations, pushing forth the use of medical ninja and the focus of turning children into soldiers. A period when shinobi myths started to become legendary. A new war era. Konhagakure, Iwagakure, Sungakure, and Omegakure are the 4 villages. In total conflict, there are 3 powerful nations and 1 small nation. The greatest number of casualties was caused by the largest number of participants. Including the Land of Sky, it would truly be regarded as 5 settlements. During this conflict, 2 villages were lost, Kirigakure and Kumogakure. Because the hosts were unable to control the Eight Tails' great power, Kumo was at the moment suffering from its raging attacks. The hamlet was heartbroken because they had hoped to employ the Jinchuriki in the conflict. Given the situation, the strategy had failed because it would take years to find the ideal host. The last person remaining was Kiri, who at the moment chose to remain impartial throughout the conflict. They will disappear as a blinding mist covers them. When Kiri unexpectedly attacked Uzushiogakure, Konoha was powerless. The combined attack of 2 Biju and a hidden town led by that guy was too much for the Uzumaki clan to handle, despite their strength. They were completely wiped off by the 3 and 6 Tails, which rampaged through the village and wiped it out. In one night, a community and a whole nation were obliterated. His crimes were already too heavy to bear. For the sake of insanity, he had set up Konoha's closest comrades for a quick and merciless demise. He had been on the verge of suicide due to the overwhelming shame. No, kid, it won't be that simple. Death will have to wait because I still need you. He had to live with his guilt. In his heart, Hiruzen had to admire the sheer brilliance of such a scheme, despite its repugnant character. At the same time that Konoha was providing the Kyuubi a new host and he received his host for his eyes, the biggest danger to his ambitions was eliminated from the face of the planet. The odds were 50-50. He described the exchange as more than fair. However, it had not ended there. Over the years, all he could do was bow to his will and aid in the annihilation of man's greatest adversaries. The clan of Uzumaki, the Senju clan, Kushina. The Uchiha family. Every day it was getting harder and harder to wake up. There were moments when he hoped he could simply go to sleep and never wake up, disappearing calmly and without any more anxieties or grief. All he wanted was for it to be over. He was worn out and elderly. His elderly bones were burdened by the hat on his head. He had tried desperately in the past to get Naruto to take the hat. If only the boy had accepted, he would have left this village without ever glancing back. Konoha held too many demons for him to bear. He wanted to just run, escape his tragic past and start anew in a faraway land. It was long since time for him to retire and live out the remainder of his days till nature took its natural effects. But as much as he tried to forget, to end the nightmares that haunted him, it would never stop. The saying goes, the past always come back to haunt you. The irony of what goes around comes around. Looking at his life right now, he was feeling the effects. Was there really a god or some higher form of being playing a game of entertainment with his life? Was all of life, all of creation, just some form of amusement? Or maybe it was just his age had finally caught up to him and he was going off the deep end, driven to madness by the face that plagued his nightmares? Or maybe it was just the weed talking. Is this what fear has done to you, little monkey? In an instant, his body shut up. The heavy silence that had just encompassed his office was deathly still. All he could hear was the sound of his pipe falling from his shaking fingers and hitting the floor. His fear-induced mind tried to feverishly tell himself that he was just imagining the voice he had just heard, but the sinister presence emitting from behind him made sure that this was all too real. He saw a blue toe-nailed foot reaching forward to slowly flip his chair around out of the corner of his eye. Hiruzen's body started to tremble violently as he turned to face the stranger. A single Sharingan eye gazed at him through the opening of an orange flame-patterned mask, one foot dangling off the desk ledge and the other folded over a knee. The man cocked his head at him, his long dark hair swaying, and he could almost feel the condescending sneer that appeared on his lips. Mada, my dear, Saru, is this the way you greet an old friend? Hiruzen parted his lips, then shut them again. Even if he wanted to, he was unable to talk. Why couldn't this man just let him be? Was he not subjected to enough torture? He started to stumble terribly and drifted off, WWHA or YY. When he saw this, the man leaned closer to force Hiruzen to look into his spinning orb, then gently shook his head in sympathy. His tremors stopped almost immediately. The man with the mask leaned back and said, "There now, speak." Hiruzen yelled in desperation, "Why are you here?" At least he wasn't stuttering, but the dread was audible. "I thought you said you'll leave me alone after the Uchiha massacre." The man tilted his head. Without waiting for a response, he leapt from the desk and went to the window to gaze out at the hamlet. "But Monkey-chan, you don't even know why I'm here." His voice sounded like a pout. "Hear me out at least." Hiruzen sat in his chair and watched him wearily. After a few moments of silence, he added, "I hear your rude seductress failed her mission. Had a rather nasty ending to her life in the process." Hiruzen did not express astonishment that the man was aware. "And?" he asked, unsure of the direction he was taking this discussion. "And you told Naruto about your mass clone production before that," the man went on. Hiruzen nodded absently, recalling the day. The boy had a year until his body failed, give or take. If that wasn't enough, he knows about the condition of your grandson. Perhaps even less in light of Blackwater's occurrences. He looked at the seated Hokage, observing the distance in his gaze. "Do you think after learning all of this, Naruto would sit still and just twiddle his thumbs?" Hiruzen gave him a harsh look, but his mask covered his smirk. He shrugged and said, "Don't you think Naruto would be I don't know, pissed?" He started to slowly pace back and forth as Hiruzen's eyes were fixed on him. His eyebrows shot up as he enumerated his transgressions, saying, "The village that he has served from the age of 7 has betrayed him. The very Hokage guilty of using the cells of his dead sibling to mass-produce clones of the Uzumaki clan, and to top it off, one of his students is a ticking time bomb. How can you not expect him to retaliate?" Hiruzen gave a gulp. He wouldn't. The man in the mask gave a smug nod. He would. The shinobi god fell on his knees before the guy, clinging to his black robes. Hiruzen pleaded, Please, help me. He'll kill me everyone. You have to do something." The man tsked and waved a finger down at him. Hiruzen froze at the whisper, "Little monkey, this is all you're doing. The extermination of the Uzumaki clan, well not them, but you still set them up with the Senju clan. and Uchiha clan was all ordered by you. The sins of the past have finally caught up to you. He sighed. Vengeance, little monkey. In the form of Konoha's most powerful Junin. He sighed. You're absolutely fuckada. Hiruzen shook his head and said, No, it wasn't my fault. You were the one who made me do it. You. He said. You're the one with the whole master plan. You're the one to blame. The man answered, You can lead the horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. He shrugged his shoulders once more and said, You're the one that was so convinced that your life was worth more than theirs. He wiped his chin and added, You could have just said no, I would have killed you, but you still could have refused. Hiruzen was aware of its veracity. He may have just refused and continued to fight until the end. That night, death would have claimed his life, but at least he could claim to have lost his life against the fabled Uchiha. But now he was merely an elderly guy, weary and suspicious. Bastard! Hiruzen roared as he sprang up and lunged forward with a kunai. The ancient Hokage stumbled as the strike merely passed through him, and the masked figure just stood there laughing. If I were you. Hiruzen turned around just in time to witness the man vanish into a space and time vortex. I would strike now. He was gone as soon as he arrived, leaving Hiruzen by himself in his office. With their swords raised, Anbu stormed inside the room. After staring at the panting Hokage, they looked around the room but saw nothing. One of them stared at Hokage bewildered as they eased out of their positions while remaining vigilant. Hokage-sama, are you alright? We heard shouting. Hiruzen continued to stare at the location where the man had been without answering the inquiry. The Anbu looked at each other, first at the room's residual smoke, then at the steaming pipe on the ground, and lastly back at the shaking guy. One of them began tentatively, Hokage-sama, maybe you should take some rest in the residence wing. Hiruzen turned to face them cautiously. As they looked into his bloodshot eyes, their mask faces concealed their emotions. His cap hung at a strange angle on his head, and the front of his robes were disheveled. The insane smile on his face was what had made them take a tentative step back. Kill Naruto. The two Anbu members hesitated, believing they had misheard. As he gazed at the third, one really took off his mask, revealing a pale face and brown hair. Pardon me, sir, but did you just saw? Kill Naruto. The Hokage's voice became louder as he approached the two. Kill Naruto. Kill Naruto. Kill Naruto. Kill Naruto. The office was eerily silent. With a mixture of anxiety and fear, the two Anbu gazed at the Hokage. What on earth was happening? Had Naruto harmed the Hokage in any way? The appearance of a familiar black armored form stopped them in their tracks. The Anbu commander entered the office and bowed before the Hokage, his red cloak swaying with every step. What troubles you, my lord? The sound of the voice-altering software made both Anbu tremble behind the strong leader. I want Naruto Namikaze dead. The commander's head cocked just a little. Hokage-sama, you cannot kill one of your soldiers without a squelch. The two Anbu guards in the room fell to the ground, suffocating to death from the kunai buried in their throats, as two kunai abruptly flew through the air. Namikaze just killed two Anbu. The punishment for such a crime is death. The commander gave a bow. By your will, Hokage-sama. As he straightened his robes, he said, Send word to our forces, but do it quietly. As the assembled shinobi waited to hear the Hokage's emergency call, Genma Shiranui slouched in his chair. He stared around the sea of green vests that filled the spacious auditorium they were in while he chewed on the senbon needle in his lips. In order to accommodate Konoha's enormous army in one location, they assembled beneath the Hokage's tower, which had a sizable hall built especially for gatherings like these. The Hokage and other high-ranking officials, including the Junin and Anbu commanders, spoke to the group from a stage in front of the enormous hall. A significant number of shinobi had arrived in Konoha throughout the previous week. During periods of peace, just 25% of Konoha's forces were often stationed in the village because the majority of the troops were either defending the border or doing missions abroad. However, green vests were suddenly ubiquitous. He pointed to the smoker next to him. Yo Asuma, the bearded Junin said, turning to face him. Did you see Naruto when you came in here? The man responded with a laugh. Genma shrugged, not quite persuaded. You should know by now that Naruto's schedule runs an hour behind everyone else's. Yeah, but even he would know better than to arrive late to an emergency meeting. Asuma took a slow drag on his cigarette and then let it out. He gave the man a shoulder pat and said, Don't worry about it, Genma, I'm sure he's fine. Lighten up, Naruto's a big boy. He can take care of himself. Genma shrugged once more. Of that I have no doubt, but then again, nobody has seen him in a week. Asuma stayed silent since he didn't know how to react to that. He looked around, talking about missing faces. Kurenai was where? The Hokage appeared on stage, followed by senior officials and the Anbu commander, bringing an end to all discourse in the audience. He paused in front of a tiny speaker and cleared his throat after coughing. He paused as his eyes grew tired. Good evening. I just want to say thank you all for coming here on such short notice. I'm sure you're all wondering why you are here. I regret to inform you all such troubling news, but it is my duty as the Hokage of Konoha to say this. We have another traitor to add to our bingo books. Everyone in Kakashi's age group sat up in the chairs at the same time. It is with a heavy heart that I, the third Hokage of Konoha, add Naruto Namikaze as an S-ranked criminal to our international bingo books. There was an utterly deafening hush in the huge hall. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the Hokage in disbelief at what they had just heard. Mouths opening was the only warning before chaos broke out. The intensity of outrage and incredulity shouts increased until the hall was filled with deafening noise. Every shinobi in the hall was literally shouting while standing on their feet. Asuma gave his father a startled look before his eyes gradually narrowed. Guy was standing in front of him, his head lowered and his body trembling with anger. Asuma and Genma exchanged a quick look, then leapt forward and restrained Guy as he burst out of his chair. The Junin growled as he struggled to free himself from their hold, his chakra starting to spike. I know Guy. Genma growled in his ear as she noticed the looks they were getting. It was still too loud for other people to hear, which pleased him. His cries went unanswered as the man started to channel chakra to open his 8 inner gates. But if you act no, you'll put us all in danger. Guy froze when Genma swiftly removed the senbon from his mouth and gently plunged it into his neck. The Hokage yelled, quiet, and the commotion subsided almost immediately. Asuma quickly used genjutsu to cover up the needle while they sat back in their seats and the auditorium fell silent. Hayate's familiar visage supported the immobilized man next to him. As the Hokage started talking, Genma nodded at him and looked at the stage. His voice became hollow as he said, Now I know emotions are high, but I assure you, what I am saying is not false. He bowed his head slightly and said, It has come to my attention that there is a rumor going around that Naruto and I had conflict. It is true. He went on as a gasp reverberated across the hallway. The Hokage sadly shook his head and said, Naruto has made an attempt to kill me. Someone that I loved like a grandson tried to take my own life. Sad voices could be heard. The room's projector abruptly flashed on, displaying a photo of Riha Yamanka to everyone. Fearing for my own safety, I sent one of my personal Anbu on mission. Some of you may know this woman and some may not. This Kunoichi, he said, gesturing to the image. Under my orders was sent to watch Naruto. Genma flashed his teeth. Her only orders were to watch him, but Riha was a loving soul. Too loving in fact. She went beyond her orders and fell in love with him. Hiruzen's voice was full of passion. A love that led to her demise. Inoichi Yamanaka remained expressionless next to him. The tears in his eyes betrayed his expression. Everyone nearby recoiled when the image of Riha flickered, revealing bleeding body parts. They were abruptly shown the words "You're next." This is all that remains of Riha Yamanaka. A jutsu was used on her that caused her body to explode, with this message written in her blood. She was also pregnant. Many faces grimaced, and there were hisses. Someone muttered, "Monster." It's always the geniuses that turn traitors, another Itachiya. Asuma and Genma exchanged a startled look. It had only gotten worse. To calm the hall, the Hokage tapped the microphone. Another image of a man with auburn hair was displayed. The killings hadn't stopped there. For you see, in his anger, Naruto, feeling betrayal at Riha, went after her brother sent to guard her. With a melancholy sigh, the Hokage said, "Fu Yamanaka." The faces were horrified. He died trying to save his sister. Another image depicted the Anbu in question with kunai stuck in their throats. Like a true soldier, he sent out a message in time before Naruto brutally killed him. And just this morning 2 Anbu sent to survey him were killed. A man yelled, "Death to the traitor," and got up. The statement was repeated like a chant, getting louder until it reverberated throughout the large hall as others around him stood up as well. The only people who stayed seated and looked disgusted at others around them were those who knew the truth. Hiruzen softly said, "Quiet," in an attempt to subdue the escalating feelings. "Quiet please." The chanting eventually stopped as everyone settled down. He cleared his throat while glancing at the shinobi who was now sitting. Many nodded in agreement. Despite his betrayal, Naruto was like a grandson to me. The legacy of our beloved 4th Hokage. I ask you all this, harden your hearts, as I have hardened mine, and let not former feelings of comradeship blind you. Naruto is a traitor. There was a roar of approval. The Hokage raised his fist, and all traitors must be punished with death. The roar, "Death to the traitor," was returned. His expression darkened. I hereby order immediately the death of the S-class traitor Naruto Namikaze, he said. Do not be afraid of his power. As powerful as he may be, he is no match for the will of fire. He sighed. Even the strongest of opponents cower before our flames. Hiruzen observed as the soldier's expressions became more irate. He raised a hand to calm the room as the loudness of the shouts increased. His gaze met every face he could see. He lies in the village at this very moment, preparing his next plan to strike. You could be next. He looked to the horrified expressions and said, your friends might be next. Your family, even your children. After witnessing such acts of violence, what's not to say he would massacre a clan? Never, shouted an Inuzuka. I'll rip him apart with my bare hands. Hiruzen gave the soldier a nod. A tiny smirk appeared on his lips as he looked at the soldiers who were eager for blood. Fear not. I have taken the liberty to begin the evacuation of civilians and non-combatants to the underground shelters as we speak. This way I am allowing you all free rein to hunt him down and kill him. The army in the room started to move, and all Genma could do was stare in dread. Wait. The room fell silent when the Hokage whispered softly. His gaze scanned the crowd, concentrating on particular features. Despite Naruto's traitorous nature, he was loved. What's not to say he hasn't brainwashed many with that Sharingan of his? He does have friends, does he not?
I will continue the series in next part. Till then, bye bye.